Far beyond familiar coastlines, the ocean hides secrets that defy explanation. Ghostly ships drift silently through vast waters, while wrecks along jagged islands hold crews who vanished without a trace. In these realms, vessels appear and disappear under circumstances that challenge both reason and the skill of seasoned mariners. Along rocky shoals and storm-tossed channels, explorers and investigators have recorded eerie lights, inexplicable drift patterns, and haunting silhouettes lingering on the horizon. Step into these mysteries and follow the trails left behind, uncovering how the ocean can conceal, preserve, and transform events into enigmas that persist long after the waves have settled. Across the endless expanse of the sea, the line between history, legend, and the unexplained remains as fluid and shifting as the waters themselves. The Mary Celeste, 1872, Atlantic Ocean. On the morning of December 5th, 1872, the British brig DEI Gratia drifted through the still waters of the Atlantic, midway between the Azores and Portugal. Her crew spotted another vessel ahead, sails full but movement erratic as though controlled by an invisible hand. The ship was the Mary Celeste, an American brigantine out of New York, bound for Genoa with a cargo of denatured alcohol. She appeared undamaged and seaworthy, her canvas set and rigging taut, yet no one was visible on deck or at the helm. When Captain David Morehouse sent a boarding party across the open sea, they stepped onto a vessel suspended between life and abandonment. Inside, the cabin air was thick with the scent of damp wood and the faint sweetness of alcohol fumes that had escaped from a few leaking barrels. The men found half-eaten breakfasts on the mess table, the ship's chronometer missing, and the captain's log last updated 10 days earlier. Water pooled along the lower deck from a removed hatch cover, but the hull remained sound, and the cargo, save for a handful of broken barrels, was intact. The lifeboat, however, was gone, along with all navigational instruments. It looked as though the crew had left in haste, yet with no sign of panic, no damage suggesting a storm or violence. Even the sextant, compass and ship's register had been carefully taken, as if the captain planned to return. Captain Morehouse recognised the ship immediately. He knew her master, Benjamin Briggs, a devout and experienced sailor who had departed New York on November 7th with his wife, Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, and 7 crewmen. Briggs was considered meticulous, a man of faith and routine who logged every minor detail of a voyage. To those who knew him, it was unthinkable that he would abandon a seaworthy ship in calm seas. Yet the Mary Celeste offered no clues to explain the vanishing of everyone on board. The ship's log, recovered from the chart room, told a story that ended abruptly. The final entry, dated November 25th, placed the vessel just north of the Azores, the same region where she would be found adrift days later, sails trimmed and drifting aimlessly toward fate. When the DEI Gratia towed the deserted brig into Gibraltar, word of the discovery spread quickly through maritime circles. The ensuing inquiry, led by the British Vice Admiralty Court, examined every possible theory, from mutiny and piracy to insurance fraud and natural disaster. The crew of the DEI Gratia was questioned for weeks, suspected of wrongdoing simply because they stood to gain salvage rights for bringing the ghost ship in, but the court found no evidence of violence or theft. Captain Morehouse's men had acted according to the law of the sea, and the Mary Celeste was declared a mystery without criminal cause. Still, the lack of answers fed speculation that would persist for generations. Among the first theories to emerge was that the crew, fearing an explosion from alcohol vapours leaking below deck, had taken to the lifeboat temporarily. It was plausible. 9 barrels of industrial alcohol were later confirmed to have leaked, and in the confined spaces of a wooden brig, even a faint spark could ignite disaster. Perhaps Briggs, cautious and level-headed, ordered everyone into the lifeboat until the fumes dispersed. But if that were true, why did they never return? The seas had been calm, visibility clear. For the lifeboat to vanish completely seemed unlikely. Other sailors suggested a sudden waterspout, a powerful column of rotating sea and air that could drench the deck and frighten the crew into believing the ship was sinking. Yet the bilge pumps and rigging were intact, showing no signs of violent weather. Over time, darker ideas surfaced. Some imagined that a mutiny had erupted, perhaps over the captain's family travelling aboard, or some unspoken tension among the men. But there were no bloodstains, no damage from struggle, and nothing missing except what would have been taken for survival. Others invoked piracy, though none of the valuable cargo had been touched. Even the crew's personal belongings remained neatly folded in their chests, as if awaiting their owner's return. When human malice could not explain it, the imagination of the age turned toward the supernatural. Newspapers speculated that the Mary Celeste had fallen under a curse or been claimed by the Bermuda Triangle, though she was hundreds of miles away from its bounds. The story began to grow in retellings. Sailors whispered that the ship was found with meals still warm, though in truth the food was only half-eaten and cold. As years passed, the Mary Celeste drifted through legend as much as she once drifted through the Atlantic. She was eventually refitted and sent to sea again, though her new owners struggled to escape the shadow of her past. By 1885, after years of failed voyages, she was deliberately wrecked off the coast of Haiti in a failed insurance scam, her remains buried in the reefs, an ignoble end for a ship that had once carried the weight of an unsolved riddle. Yet the disappearance of her crew continued to fascinate. Maritime scholars re-examined the case through the 20th century, noting that Captain Briggs had trusted his instruments, which might have misled him about the ship's position, or that the vessel's deep cargo hold made her roll unpredictably in calm waters, convincing him she was taking on water. Still, no single explanation fits every detail. Even in modern analysis, with simulation models and weather reconstructions, the Mary Celeste refuses to yield her truth. The recovered log, though precise in its final entry, stops without distress or warning, as if the crew had simply stepped away from time itself. The ocean that once carried their ship still holds their secret, vast and indifferent, its surface calm above the place where fear and reason vanish together. And somewhere beyond the reach of answers, the Mary Celeste still drifts through history, a vessel forever at sea. The MV Joyita, 1955, South Pacific. When the merchant vessel MV Joyita was sighted adrift on November 10, 1955, the sun had already burned high over the coral seas between Samoa and Fiji. The fishing boat that found her, weathered and lifeless against the bright horizon, approached cautiously, expecting survivors or distress signals. Instead, what the rescuers saw was a vessel listing sharply to port, her hull half submerged but stubbornly afloat. She'd been missing for over a month, and her decks were silent, streaked with salt and neglect. The ship's name, Yoyita, meaning Little Jewel, had long promised calm voyages and small fortunes. Yet as she rocked in the still water that morning, she seemed to wear a different name entirely, one whispered in disbelief by every man who climbed aboard. Ghost ship. Below the shattered bridge windows, the interior told a story that no one could fully understand. Blood-stained bandages lay folded near the radio, as though used in haste and then forgotten. Cups and plates remained stacked neatly beside a cold stove. Personal belongings, watches, shoes, clothing, were untouched, while crucial equipment was missing, including lifeboats, logbooks, and navigational instruments. The starboard engine was disabled, the port engine's clutch broken. Yet the vessel still floated thanks to her cork-lined hull, designed to make her nearly unsinkable. It was as though the crew had abandoned her in panic, convinced she was doomed, while the ship herself quietly proved them wrong. No sign of violence, storm, or struggle appeared on deck, but something had frightened those aboard enough to leave behind their only means of safety. Aboard the Joyita had been 16 people. Captain Thomas Dusty Miller, a respected sailor with years of experience in the Pacific, along with his crew and several passengers, including a government official, a doctor, and traders bound for the Tokelau Islands. They departed from Apia, Samoa, on October 3, 1955, loaded with cargo ranging from medical supplies to tinned food, timber, and empty oil drums. It was a routine voyage expected to last 2 days, but radio operators lost contact almost immediately after departure, and the ship failed to arrive in Tokelau. Weeks passed with no sightings, no distress calls, and no wreckage, until fishermen stumbled upon her adrift more than 600 miles off course. The condition of her radios suggested someone had tried to send a message. The transmitter was tuned to the international distress frequency, yet it was incapable of transmitting due to a disconnected wire. It was as if someone had attempted a call for help that could never be heard. For weeks, the search had swept across thousands of square miles, following currents and winds that might have carried her debris. Yet when she was finally found, her hull bore no trace of collision or grounding. Investigators puzzled over her state. The clock on board had stopped at 10:25 and the navigation lights were on, though the generators were dead. The fuel tanks were nearly empty and food stores were mostly intact. Most haunting of all was the medical kit, opened as if someone had been wounded, though no body was ever recovered. Even more mysterious, the logbook had vanished entirely, erasing the last record of what happened on board. Without it, the final hours of the Joyita became a void of silence and salt, the kind only the Pacific can keep. Investigators from both Fiji and New Zealand examined the Joyita for weeks, trying to reconcile her physical state with the timeline of her disappearance. They found that her bilge pumps were clogged with debris and could not function, and one of the pipes that should have drained water from the engine room had corroded completely through. This meant that water had been rising gradually inside the vessel without immediate danger, yet enough to appear alarming to a cautious captain. Marine experts later concluded that the crew might have overestimated the flooding and abandoned the ship while it was still buoyant. What confused investigators further was that Joyita's cork-lined hull made her nearly impossible to sink, a fact every sailor aboard should have known. Some speculated that Captain Miller believed the vessel was sinking after water began to flood the bilges through a corroded pipe. With one engine disabled and a slow list to port, he may have ordered an evacuation, expecting rescue from nearby islands. But in the open sea, a small lifeboat is rarely found, especially if it capsizes in a storm or breaks apart in the current. Others suspected piracy, a not uncommon threat in those waters during the 1950s, but the cargo, though modest in value, had not been taken. There was also the unsettling possibility of conflict among those aboard. Tension, injury, or fear may have spread quickly in the confined space, driving a hasty decision that ended in catastrophe. Yet every explanation carries its own flaw. No storm was reported. The ship's distress signals never reached land. The very design that kept her afloat long after she was abandoned proves that panic, not reason, may have decided the crew's fate. Even after official inquiries closed the case, Joyita remained a riddle adrift in maritime history. She was salvaged and refitted, though sailors whispered that she carried an unlucky shadow. Later voyages met with mechanical failures, collisions and financial ruin for those who owned her. In 1959, she was finally abandoned near the harbour of Vanuatu, her hull decaying among the reefs she once crossed with purpose. Yet her story endures. A ship that refused to sink but could not hold on to the living. The Pacific has a long memory, and in its quietest stretches, when the water mirrors the sky, some swear they've seen her form again on the horizon, tilted, silent, and waiting for a crew that will never return. Over the decades that followed, the Joyita became a symbol of the ocean's unbroken silence. Her story appeared in newspapers, maritime studies, and countless retellings by sailors who claimed to have seen her shape in the mist. Some accounts described a derelict vessel drifting without lights, others a phantom echo on sonar where no ship could be. Each version added another layer to her legend, a reminder that the sea does not always bury what it takes, but sometimes sends it back as a question no one can answer. The Joyita was built to survive the sea, but perhaps it was never built to survive what waited beneath it. SS Orang Medan, 1947, Strait of Malacca. It began with a signal crackling through the humid air of the Strait of Malacca, one of the busiest sea lanes in the world. The message was faint, distorted by static, yet unmistakably urgent. A distress call from a Dutch freighter known as the SS Orang Medan. The operator's trembling Morse code transmitted a sequence that chilled those who received it. All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in the chart room and bridge. Possibly the whole crew is dead. A brief pause followed, then a final message, garbled and broken, ending with two haunting words, "I die." After that, there was only silence. By the time rescuers found the drifting vessel, only silence remained. The Orang Medan floated aimlessly under the sweltering sun, its hull intact, its sails and rigging eerily still. A US merchant vessel, the Silver Star, was the first to respond, maneuvering cautiously alongside the ghostly freighter. There were no signs of life, no movement on deck, only the slow, rhythmic creak of metal expanding in the heat. As the boarding crew climbed aboard, a sense of dread settled over them like the oppressive humidity in the air. The details recorded by the boarding crew read like fragments of a nightmare. Everybody on board, from the captain on the bridge to the radio operator slumped near his set, was frozen in terror, eyes wide open, mouths twisted into silent screams. Some pointed towards an unseen horror, while others clutched their chests or faces. Even the ship's dog, lying stiff near the galley, bore the same expression of panic. Yet there were no wounds, no signs of struggle, no trace of poison or violence. The logbook did not explain. The ship's structure remained sound. Its cargo holds were sealed and unremarkable. One detail persisted through every account. The atmosphere below deck was unbearably hot. Those who ventured down claimed it felt as though the very air was pressing against their lungs, thick and suffocating. The metal walls radiated a strange warmth, as if something within the ship itself had been burning without flame. The smell of sulphur hung in the corridors, mixed with the sharp tang of something chemical. Some speculated that the ship had been carrying volatile materials, nitroglycerin, potassium cyanide, or even munitions left from the Second World War, though no manifest confirmed it. Others whispered of secret cargo, part of the post-war black market that flourished in the shadows of Southeast Asia. What happened next only deepened the confusion. As the Silver Star prepared to tow the Orang Medan back to port, smoke began to rise from the lower decks. Moments later, a powerful explosion tore through the freighter, engulfing it in fire. The blast forced the rescuers to cut their lines and retreat. Within minutes, the ship that had been so inexplicably silent erupted into a roaring inferno, and by the time the smoke cleared, the Orang Medan had vanished beneath the waves. Nothing but a faint slick of oil and floating debris marked the spot where it had gone down. Later investigations produced more questions than answers. Maritime records from the Dutch East Indies listed no vessel officially registered under the name Orang Medan, though some fragments of paperwork hinted at a ship operating under false or temporary registry. The coordinates of the reported sinking, roughly between Sumatra and Malaysia, revealed no wreck when surveyed in later decades. The Silver Star's logs confirmed the distress call and their encounter, but much of the documentation disappeared over time, fueling speculation that authorities had quietly suppressed the incident. Among the many theories that followed, one suggested the ship was carrying chemical weapons, phosgene or potassium cyanide gas, smuggled out of Japanese stockpiles after the war. Another spoke of a mixture of sodium and seawater producing a deadly reaction. Each theory offered fragments of logic, but never the whole picture. In the years that followed, the story of the Orang Medan spread quietly among sailors and investigators alike. Radio operators repeated tales of that final, stuttering message, how it seemed too deliberate to be mere interference. Some versions claimed the voice had been strangely monotone, as if mechanical. Others noted that the message had been transmitted in distress frequencies reserved for Allied vessels, though the Orang Medan's registry was never officially Allied. Historians in later decades found scattered references in Dutch maritime circles, suggesting that the ship may have been a converted military transport once used for secret logistics during the final years of the war. Yet each new trace dissolved into uncertainty, as though the vessel itself had been erased from history. One account, published in a 1952 US Coast Guard intelligence bulletin, described the case in detached factual language but hinted at missing information. It noted that the Orang Medan's wireless equipment was modern and functional, capable of transmitting over long distances, which implied that the operator had survived longer than anyone else aboard. The document, later reprinted in marine journals, suggested that some messages may have been intercepted by naval monitoring stations, though no transcripts have ever been made public. A few researchers believe the disappearance of those logs indicates deliberate classification, part of the early Cold War climate when maritime incidents near Asia were treated as potential espionage threats. Decades later, the ocean floor where the ship went down remains uncharted. Salvage teams have searched for debris, yet no hull fragments or identifiable cargo have ever surfaced. The coordinates given by the Silver Star no longer correspond to an active wreck site, leading some to suspect that the ship may have drifted further before sinking. In the absence of physical proof, the Orang Medan has drifted instead into maritime legend, a ghost ship story laced with just enough fact to remain plausible. Whether it was the victim of chemical poisoning, radio malfunction, or something unearthly, no explanation can account for the identical terror etched into every face aboard. Rumours about the Orang Medan never truly faded. Over the years, sailors in the Strait of Malacca have spoken of ghostly transmissions, bursts of static breaking across empty frequencies, and the faint outline of a ship that appears and vanishes on radar. Some believe these are nothing more than atmospheric distortions. Others swear they hear fragments of Morse code, repeating that same distress call from 1947. The sea around Sumatra, they say, sometimes hums with voices that do not belong to the living. Some believe the radio message was never a call for help, but a warning that came too late. The CAS-2, 2007, Coral Sea, Australia. Morning broke over the Coral Sea in late April 2007 with skies so clear that the horizon looked endless. A soft band of blue stretching unbroken in every direction. On the radar screens of an Australian Coast Guard patrol, a white catamaran drifted in the open water, its sails still raised, its engines idling steadily. From a distance it appeared perfectly fine, the kind of scene that wouldn't warrant a second glance. Yet as the patrol approached, the calmness of the vessel seemed unnatural. No one was on deck, no one came to the radio. The CAS-2 floated quietly in the sun, its twin hulls cutting a still reflection over the water, like a photograph left too long in the light. 3 men had set out aboard that same catamaran just days earlier from Airlie Beach, Queensland, bound for Townsville, a short coastal voyage that should have lasted barely a weekend. They were not inexperienced sailors. Skipper Derek Batten, 56, had years of yachting behind him, while brothers Peter and James Tunstead were confident and capable at sea. Their route was planned carefully. The weather forecast promised calm winds and low seas. The CAS-2 itself, a 10-metre luxury vessel equipped with GPS, VHF radio and autopilot, was designed for easy cruising. Everything about the trip suggested control and normalcy. Nothing in their preparations hinted that they would vanish within sight of the Australian coast. Inside the vessel, the boarding officers found a scene so tidy it was almost theatrical. A laptop sat open and running on the navigation table. A folded newspaper from the day before lay beside a cup of coffee, still half full. A meal had been set on the galley table, utensils neatly placed. A fishing line trailed into the sea, taut but unmanned, its reel slowly turning with the current. The boat's sails were slightly torn, but the engine purred steadily. The radio was operational and every piece of emergency equipment remained in place. Life jackets, survival gear, even the emergency beacon untouched. It looked, investigators would later say, as though the crew had simply stepped off for a moment and never returned. Footage recovered from a digital camera on board provided the last known glimpse of the missing men. It showed them alive and calm, filming each other as they sailed north along the Whitsunday Islands. The sea in the footage was glassy and flat, sunlight flashing off the deck as one man untangled a fishing line near the stern. Another stood barefoot at the helm, laughing. A third filmed the horizon. There was no storm on the horizon, no sign of panic, only the quiet rhythm of a normal voyage. The final clip, time-stamped April 15th, ended abruptly, without sound or movement, as if the moment had been neatly cut away. Reports from the subsequent investigation tried to make sense of what the sea had left behind. The CAS-2's GPS logs indicated steady progress along its intended route until the afternoon of the 15th, after which the boat drifted without course correction. Wind data confirmed calm conditions that day, and radio logs contained no distress calls. The official theory proposed that one man might have fallen overboard while checking the fishing line, and the others had tried to rescue him. Perhaps the autopilot kept the vessel moving as all 3 ended up in the water. But when the details were weighed, this version felt incomplete. The fishing line was still coiled neatly, not snapped. The sail tears appeared minor and unrelated to the weather. And even if all 3 men had gone overboard, why was no life jacket missing? No sign of sudden movement on deck, no trace of struggle. Forensic analysts who examined the vessel noted another anomaly. The CAS-2's engine clutch was found partially engaged, a position that made little sense for normal sailing, but could indicate a sudden interruption in operation. Salt patterns on the deck suggested that at least one wave had broken over the bow, yet there was no damage or evidence of flooding below. Curiously, a small rip in the starboard sail had fibres pulled inward rather than outward, as if something had caught from within. These fragments of evidence, minor on their own, seemed to tell a fragmented story of something abrupt, something that did not align with the ordinary rhythm of the sea. Days of aerial and maritime search operations followed. Rescue helicopters swept across 7,000 square kilometres of ocean. Patrol boats traced currents and drift patterns with mathematical precision, using the boat's last known position as a reference point. But the Coral Sea is deceptive. Its surface calm conceals strong, invisible movements below, where tides and cross-currents weave together in unpredictable ways. Nothing was ever found. No floating debris, no items washed ashore, no human remains. When the search ended, the official statement called it a tragic accident in fair weather, yet the sense of unreality persisted. The evidence did not resemble an accident, it resembled disappearance. Spoken with quiet unease along the coast and among mariners, the name Kaz II lingered for months after its disappearance. Its mystery was unnervingly modern, born in an age of digital records, satellite imaging, and routine safety checks. Everything that should have explained it instead emphasized what could not be explained. Specialists pointed to freak waves too small to register on instruments. Others noted the unpredictable convergence of wind and current along the Great Barrier Reef shelf. Yet none of these theories accounted for the unbroken calm recorded in the footage, or why an experienced crew would leave a running engine, a meal on the table, and no sign of distress. The catamaran was towed back to shore, studied, and eventually released, an object emptied of its meaning yet still quietly humming with unanswered questions. The Kaz II remains one of the most haunting maritime mysteries of the 21st century, not because of chaos or violence, but because of its impossible stillness. Everything was visible, recorded, and precise, yet the truth slipped soundlessly away. In a world wired for certainty, the Coral Sea had produced an absence that technology could not fill, a silence so complete that even its cause felt deliberate. The Coral Sea lies quiet still, as though its waves remember what no one else ever can. The Carroll A. Deering, 1921, Cape Hatteras, US. Along the wind-scoured sands of Cape Hatteras, the remains of the Carroll A. Deering stood like a stranded phantom, its 5 masts tilting toward the grey sky as waves hissed around its hull. The surf had buried her keel in the shoals, ropes hung slack from the yards, and her sails, torn yet still hoisted, fluttered weakly in the Atlantic air. No voices echoed from her deck, no movement stirred her rigging, and yet everything about the scene suggested her departure had been abrupt, almost interrupted. Even the gulls seemed to circle at a distance, wary of the silence that hung heavier than the sea mist itself. Commissioned in Bath, Maine in 1919, the Carroll A. Deering was the pride of the G.G. Deering Company, a towering 5-masted schooner built for the long trade routes between the Americas. She carried the elegant symmetry of a bygone era, one of the last great sailing ships before steam took command of the oceans. Her captain, William B. Wormel, was 66, a veteran of decades at sea, stern yet respected by those who served him. His chosen first mate, Charles McClellan, had been with him before, but the rest of the crew, mostly young, restless sailors from around the East Coast, were strangers. When the Deering departed Norfolk for Rio de Janeiro with a cargo of coal, it seemed just another commercial voyage, though Wormel's letters home would later hint that he mistrusted some of the men aboard. Departing Rio in December 1920, the Deering began her homeward voyage light in ballast, her sails set northward through calmer seas. Wormel had fallen ill in port and his first mate took on more duties than usual. Accounts later suggested tension on deck, arguments overheard, and one man confined for disobedience. By the time she cleared Barbados, the schooner was weathering squalls and fatigue alike. Wormel's last correspondence described the strain of command and his desire to return to Maine. It was a statement written with the weariness of an old mariner sensing a shadow he could not quite name. Hours before she vanished, the Deering was sighted by the Cape Lookout lightship off the coast of North Carolina. The lightship's keeper reported a strange exchange. A tall, red-haired man, clearly not the captain, shouted through a megaphone that the vessel had lost her anchors and requested the message be relayed to her owners. The voice, the keeper noted, carried an unfamiliar tone, impatient, even agitated. Behind him, the crew moved restlessly about the deck, their figures half hidden by the haze. When the message was delivered to shore, it was already too late. By dawn on January 31st, 1921, the Carroll A. Deering was seen aground on Diamond Shoals, a notorious stretch of shifting sands known to sailors as the graveyard of the Atlantic. By the time rescuers reached her 2 days later, the ocean had turned savage again, and boarding proved perilous. When they finally climbed aboard, they found a ship seemingly abandoned in haste. The galley showed loaves of bread cooling on the stove, and coffee cups stood half full, as if the crew had left mid-meal. The navigation log, sextant and lifeboats were gone. The steering gear had been intentionally disabled, and a broken binnacle lay at the captain's station. Only the silence remained, profound, total, and inexplicable. No blood, no struggle, no sign of violence. Just a great schooner, empty as a shell, her sails still reaching for the wind. Reports from the first surfmen who tried to board her described an unsettling quiet that went beyond mere emptiness. They noted that the ship's clock had stopped at 10:20, its pendulum frozen mid-swing, and that several pairs of boots had been lined neatly near the companionway, as if waiting for their owners to return. In the captain's quarters, his bed remained unmade, and the log desk was found open but blank, its last page torn cleanly out. What struck the men most was a single cat's paw print in the dust near the helm, smudged by moisture, leading nowhere. Every item seemed arranged in a way that made sense only to the vanished. Salvage crews catalogued what they could. The Coast Guard, under Lieutenant Commander R.L. Edwards, reported that every portable object of value was missing, yet the cargo hold remained intact. The logbook's absence removed the voyage's last written trace, erasing the sequence of events that might have explained her fate. Investigators found no evidence of piracy, no nearby wreckage, no distress calls. Wormel's personal effects were gone, along with the ship's charts. Even the wheel's position told nothing, fixed as though someone had left it mid-turn. Newspapers called it the ghost ship of the Atlantic, and when the hull was later dynamited to clear the channel, fragments of her frame drifted for miles, washing up along the outer banks like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit. Whispers began almost immediately. Some said the crew mutinied, weary of Wormel's discipline and driven by frustration to abandon him. Others pointed to rum runners operating off Hatteras during the Prohibition era, who might have seized the vessel and silenced her men. Theories multiplied in the months that followed. Bolshevik saboteurs, hurricanes, even supernatural causes drawn from maritime folklore. The US Department of Commerce convened an extensive inquiry, gathering testimony from shipyards, lightship keepers and coastal patrols, yet none could produce a single definitive answer. The file closed in 1922, unresolved, its pages still bearing the faint salt stains of their journey across desks and sea air alike. Years later, fishermen still spoke of the Deering when storms rolled in from the east. They claimed that pieces of her mast and timbers continued to wash ashore, decades after her destruction, carried by the currents as though she were trying to return home. The story lingered in local memory, Cape Hatteras, the place where ships go silent and time leaves no witnesses. Maritime historians still study her as a symbol of an age's end, when the last wooden giants yielded to iron and steam. Yet for all the analysis and speculation, one truth endures. No one ever found the men who vanished with her, or the reason why the sea chose to keep them. The ocean still remembers that morning, but whatever it whispers to the wind is not meant for us to hear. The Jianseng, 2006 Gulf of Carpentaria. Far from the Queensland coast, where the sea turns shallow and the light thickens to a silvery haze, an Australian customs surveillance plane first spotted the drifting freighter. It was March 2006, and the Gulf of Carpentaria lay quiet. No storms, no fishing vessels nearby, only a single rust-streaked ship gliding aimlessly across calm water. Through the plane's lens, the vessel appeared ghostly, its hull sun-faded, its decks untended yet strangely intact. No movement stirred, no smoke, no distress signals, not even the shimmer of life at the railings. On the side of the ship, the faint white letters spelled a name that looked almost erased by the sea, Jianseng. Approaching by patrol boat took hours. The Gulf's waters were warm and heavy that season, moving slowly against the hulls of the customs crew who had been dispatched to investigate. As they drew near, they saw that the freighter's flag was gone, only a frayed length of rope flapped in the wind where one might have been. The ship's name was painted twice, once in English, once in Chinese, but both were nearly worn away. From the radio, they tried every known emergency frequency. No answer came back. The boarding team moved up the rusted ladder in silence, their boots scraping on salt and metal, the air sharp with diesel and decay. Inside, the corridors were stripped bare. Every door had been left open, as if someone had walked through them all in a hurry and never returned. In the mess hall, dishes were scattered but clean. The engine room was spotless, its machinery well maintained though silent. Charts and manuals in Chinese were stacked neatly on a table, but every identifying page, serial numbers, registry marks had been carefully cut out. The ship's logbook was missing entirely, as was any form of documentation that could have told where it came from or where it was bound. What remained were faint traces of purpose, a cache of rice sacks in the hold, and an unusual quantity of diesel drums stored midship. None of it explained why an operational freighter had been left adrift without crew, anchor or message. Officials soon traced every maritime registry they could access, combing through international databases and port records across the Indo-Pacific. No listing for a vessel named Jianseng existed in current circulation. Its markings didn't match any known fleet, nor were there records of it being sold, leased or stolen. Satellite imagery showed no distress signals, no transponder activity, and no prior trace of its voyage. When customs officers checked the hull's identification number, they found it had been crudely filed down, a deliberate act that erased its origin. It was as though the freighter had been constructed to exist without history. Maritime analysts noted that the Gulf of Carpentaria had quietly become a corridor for unregistered vessels in the early 2000s, ships that drifted between Papua New Guinea, Indonesia and Australia without ever appearing on maritime databases. Some were used to offload contraband fuel, others to exchange undocumented goods beyond radar range. Yet none of those vessels matched the Jianseng scale or condition. Its hull, though corroded, bore marks of recent maintenance, suggesting it had been serviced only months before discovery. Even the paint along its waterline showed signs of a deliberate overcoat, as if someone had tried to disguise its original markings before releasing it to the current. Others who examined the case offered theories that only deepened its unease. Some believed it was an old supply ship used to refuel illegal fishing vessels that operated beyond Australian waters, abandoned when it broke down. Others suspected smugglers or even human trafficking routes gone wrong, but these explanations faltered under inspection. The ship's diesel drums were clean, full and organised, not the waste of a hurried retreat. There were no hidden compartments, no weapons, no contraband. The fuel was high grade, too refined for fishing boats, too specialised for small operations, and there was not a single sign of mechanical failure. The Jianseng had not been left behind by accident. It had been released. Weeks passed as authorities debated what to do with the vessel. With no claimants, no registry, and no way to trace ownership, it became a logistical problem more than a mystery. It drifted for days under watch, its shadow sliding across the blue expanse of the Gulf like an unwanted memory. There were attempts to tow it to Viper, but the freighter's structure had weakened, making it dangerous to recover. In the end, the decision was pragmatic and cold. It would be scuttled offshore, sunk deliberately to prevent navigation hazards. The crew who performed the demolition described the moment it went under, the sea swallowing it whole, the sound of collapsing steel echoing across flat water before silence returned. After its disappearance, the story briefly surfaced in Australian news reports: ghost ship found drifting in Gulf of Carpentaria. But the coverage faded almost as soon as it appeared. There was no follow-up, no investigation beyond the routine. The case remained open only as a line in maritime safety logs, a blank in an otherwise digital record. Yet among coastal workers and officers who had boarded her, the image lingered: the empty bridge, the paperless walls, the faint smell of fuel that seemed too fresh for an abandoned ship. Some spoke of it as if it were a warning, proof that the sea still carried things that governments preferred not to name. Perhaps what made the Jianseng so haunting was not the absence of clues, but the precision of what had been erased. Every visible trace of identity had been stripped, leaving only a perfectly functioning vessel without a story. In an age where satellites track every route, and where cargo ships are logged by the minute, here was a freighter that resisted the record. Its silence was not natural, it was curated. Some believed it had been used for operations never meant to exist in daylight. Perhaps a test, perhaps a message. Others believed it was something simpler, the ocean returning an artifact from a trade no one dared acknowledge. Whatever it was, the Jianseng moved through the Gulf like a ghost from the future, a reminder that technology can erase as completely as time. The Gulf remains calm, but those who watch the freighter vanish beneath it still say the water there feels heavier than it should, as if something unseen still drifts just beneath the surface, refusing to rest. The High Aim 6, 2003 Australian coast. Across the vast waters off the northwestern coast of Australia, the fishing trawler High Aim 6 drifted silently in the late days of January 2003, its white hull glinting under a pale tropical sun. Local fishermen first noticed it listing slightly, its engines dead, its nets trailing in the current. From a distance, it seemed an ordinary vessel awaiting its crew's return, yet as the patrol boats approached, no movement stirred on its deck. The sea was calm, the air heavy with heat, and still the trawler remained motionless, a ghost of commerce stranded in living water. Registered in Taiwan and manned mostly by Indonesian sailors, High Aim 6 had last made contact weeks earlier near Christmas Island. Its skipper, Captain Chen Chung Lee, was known for routine tuna expeditions across the Indian Ocean, often remaining at sea for months at a time. This voyage had begun as no different. Radio logs from mid-December recorded weather updates and fishing yields, all normal and steady. But soon after, the transmission ceased without warning. No distress call followed, no request for assistance. The ship simply faded from communication, as though its signal had been swallowed by distance. Within the hull, Australian authorities found a setting eerily preserved. Tools were neatly stowed, work boots lined in pairs near the steps, and food supplies barely touched. Fuel tanks were half full, and the engine showed no mechanical fault that could explain abandonment. In the mess room, a newspaper lay open on the table beside a tin of rice and a spoon still resting inside. A faint smell of diesel hung in the air, mixed with salt and something faintly metallic. Nothing appeared looted, yet everything looked paused, an interrupted moment left to drift with the tide. Marine surveyors later noted that the ship's position, roughly 180 kilometres off Broome, indicated it had been carried northward by the Leeuwin current for at least 2 weeks before discovery. The oil in its crankcase had turned dark with inactivity, and the radio's battery had long since drained. Investigators studying the autopilot system found it disengaged but functional, suggesting the vessel had been deliberately left adrift rather than had mechanically failed. Nearby drift buoys were examined to estimate when its engine stopped. Results suggested a halt sometime after January 5th, nearly 20 days before sighting. The precision of these findings only deepened the strangeness. If the ship had floated for that long in open water, how had no one seen it sooner, and where had its men gone? Authorities traced the ship's registry back to the port of Tungkang in southern Taiwan, confirming its ownership under a small private company that often leased vessels to foreign crews. Attempts to contact the company met confusion, records were outdated, and the listed owner could not provide recent crew manifests. Indonesian officials later identified one crewman who had returned home, a man who claimed that mutiny had broken out aboard the trawler. According to his account, several sailors turned on the captain and engineer before abandoning ship in a small boat, leaving the vessel to drift. But even this confession faltered under scrutiny. No motive was ever confirmed, and no bodies or lifeboats were found along the presumed route. Theories multiplied in the months that followed. Some maritime analysts proposed that the crew had been recruited under false contracts and revolted once at sea, while others believed the ship had been used for illegal fishing or smuggling, abandoned once authorities drew near. Yet nothing tangible tied High Aim 6 to contraband or criminal activity. Its hold contained no unusual cargo, no altered compartments, and no signs of hasty removal. The vessel's electronics were intact, and even its navigation charts remained in place, as though awaiting a return that never came. Amid the confusion, diplomatic cables moved quietly between Canberra, Jakarta and Taipei, each nation uncertain who should claim responsibility for the vessel now bobbing aimlessly in foreign waters. Australian maritime agencies studied current patterns and backtracked drift paths through satellite data, concluding that the ship had travelled more than 500 kilometres from its last recorded position. Interpol circulated notices, but responses came slowly. Many small fishing outfits across Asia operated without formal records, their crew lists handwritten or incomplete. For weeks, the High Aim 6 became a symbol of modern maritime opacity, a floating contradiction of legality, existing everywhere and nowhere at once. By early March, the trawler was deemed a hazard to navigation and was quietly towed into Broome for inspection. Photographs taken during its arrival show seagulls perched on the railings, ropes stiff with salt and the cabin door swinging gently with the swell. Local newspapers called it the ghost trawler of the Timor Sea, a name that stuck long after the investigation closed. When the hull was finally searched for evidence, little remained beyond what the ocean had spared: waterlogged logs, scraps of paper, and a single torn calendar marking the first week of January. Months later, Maritime Archives filed the incident as abandonment by unknown cause, the bureaucratic phrasing flattening the strangeness into routine. Yet for those who had boarded her, the memory of that silence lingered. The High Aim 6 had been neither wrecked nor storm-tossed, and its hull bore no marks of violence. It was as if the human element had been erased mid-voyage, leaving behind only the mechanical shell of intention. In every tale shared along the Northern Territory's coast, she was never gone, only waiting. A few claimed to have glimpsed her outline again, distant and low on the horizon, her faded paint catching the evening sun like a mirage. No official sighting ever confirmed those accounts, but the thought of a crewless vessel wandering the edges of known waters was enough to unsettle even seasoned sailors. The High Aim 6, stripped of its nameplate and later dismantled for scrap, remained restless in memory, another unanswered question adrift in Australia's wide and silent seas. The sea forgets no vessel, but sometimes it remembers too much. The Octavius, legendary 18th century Arctic Ocean. Under the pale stillness of the Arctic horizon, the whaling ship Herald pressed through shifting ice fields in the late autumn of 1775. The cold hung in the air like glass, the sun low and distant, its light unable to warm even the waves. In the distance, a dark silhouette took shape, a three-masted ship locked motionless among the floes. Through spyglasses, her sails hung in tatters, her rigging stiff with frost. The vessel's name, faintly visible beneath a film of ice, read Octavius. No signal came from her deck. No movement stirred. She looked less like a ship than the shadow of one, embalmed by the sea's endless winter. Drawn closer by a mixture of duty and dread, the Herald's captain ordered a small crew to board. They crossed the groaning ice on foot, their boots cracking the crusted surface as the wind moaned through frozen rigging. The boarding party found no signs of life, only silence and the creak of wood contracting in the cold. The ship's wheel was unmanned, the lines rigid, and the deck powdered with snow that had drifted through open seams. One of the men remarked that even the air felt different, heavier, as though sound itself had been frozen mid-breath. What they found below deck would turn their mission into a legend. Inside the captain's cabin, the lantern light flickered weakly over a scene that seemed carved from the ice itself. The captain sat at his desk, slumped forward, a quill still held loosely in his hand. His features were calm, the expression almost thoughtful, preserved by the deep freeze. Around him, the other officers lay in their bunks, equally untouched by decay. Maps covered the walls, their edges curled and stiff. A small compass rested beside a cup that had frozen mid-sip. On the desk lay an open logbook, its ink pale but legible. The final entry bore the date October 11th, 1762. The discovery party withdrew in stunned quiet, the air thick with a sense that they had walked into something meant never to be seen. Written in a precise, steady hand, the log recorded details of a voyage from London toward the Orient. The Octavius had departed nearly 13 years earlier, its last coordinates suggesting it had entered the uncharted Northwest Passage. If true, the ship had succeeded where others had perished, sailing from the Atlantic through to the Pacific, but the feat was rendered meaningless by its fate. The last words in the book spoke of calm seas and a light wind from the west, then stopped abruptly. The ink trailed downward, ending mid-line, as if the cold had descended in that very moment. If the entries were authentic, the ship had been locked in ice for more than a decade before the Herald found her. Accounts of the discovery spread quickly through maritime circles, carried by log entries, dockside gossip, and letters between captains. The tale grew stranger with each retelling. Some said Octavius's candles were still burning when she was found. Others claimed the crew appeared lifelike, their eyes open, as though they had only just looked up. But one element never changed: the atmosphere of eerie preservation. The ship, they said, had not sunk, had not broken apart. It had simply endured. Every nail, every rope, every life on board had been caught between existence and erasure. Such perfect stillness, sailors argued, could only belong to a vessel that had slipped beyond the ordinary reach of time. During the late 18th century, the story of the Octavius fed into the wider obsession with the Arctic frontier. Explorers and cartographers debated whether the Northwest Passage was a navigable route or a death sentence. The legend found its way into naval reports, alongside names like Hudson, Franklin, and Cook, blurring the line between exploration and folklore. In later centuries, maritime historians would attempt to verify the tale, searching for records of the Herald's crew or corroborating documents. Yet no official report confirmed the encounter. The Octavius remained absent from registries and Lloyd's records, existing only in scattered references and retellings passed through decades of sailors' journals and nautical folklore collections. Over time, the Octavius came to symbolize something more than an ill-fated voyage. It became a warning. Mariners crossing northern routes would speak of it in low tones, claiming that phantom sails sometimes appeared on the horizon when ice fog rolled in. Some reports from 19th century whalers described hearing the faint clatter of rigging through frozen mist, or the hollow echo of a bell where no ship could be seen. Scholars have traced these accounts through various naval archives, noting their strange consistency despite the years between them. The details differed, but the feeling remained the same: an ancient presence drifting through a sea that remembers every death it has claimed. Even into the modern age, the Octavius resurfaced in unexpected places. Fragments of the legend appeared in Arctic expedition notes, Victorian ghost stories, and maritime encyclopedias printed well into the 20th century. Some historians suggest that the story may have originated as a fusion of several incidents. Perhaps the remains of an unidentified merchant vessel found by British or Dutch crews during the 1700s. Others argue that the precision of the details, the date, the names, the frozen captain, points to a real event obscured by time and myth. Yet even this debate seems to circle endlessly, like a compass spinning in magnetic fog, always returning to the same cold image: a ship in perfect stillness, crewed by the dead, discovered long after the world had moved on. Now and then, polar researchers still speak of the legend when navigating ice channels near Alaska and the Canadian Arctic archipelago. They note that several wrecks from the 18th century remain undiscovered beneath the ice shelf, preserved by temperature and depth. It is not impossible, they say, that among them lies a vessel with timbers blackened by age and a logbook frozen in place. The Arctic has a way of keeping secrets, not through malice but through patience. What the sea hides, it hides completely, until one day it might be seen again. No chronicle has ever held the Octavius steady. It moves like a mirage across the line, separating history from myth. SS Bachimo, 1931 Arctic Circle. Encased in the relentless grip of winter ice near Barrow, Alaska, the SS Bachimo became a vessel frozen in time, her hull imprisoned as the crew faced a choice between survival and duty. The men, led by Captain Cornwell, built makeshift shelters on the surrounding ice and tended small fires against temperatures that dropped well below 40 degrees C. Weeks passed in the isolation of the polar night, each day a struggle to remain warm, fed and sane while watching their ship groan and creak under the crushing weight of ice. The Arctic was indifferent, yet it had chosen to preserve the Bachimo, keeping her upright even as hope seemed to vanish along with the fading sunlight. Constructed in Sweden in 1914 as Angermanelven, the ship had been designed for endurance in icy waters. Measuring over 1,300 tons, she served the Hudson's Bay Company, ferrying furs, trade goods and supplies between Canada's northern outposts and European ports. Her steel hull and reinforced bow made her one of the few vessels capable of surviving the unpredictable northern seas. For years, Bachimo carried cargo across treacherous waters without incident, becoming a familiar sight to seasoned sailors who knew the Arctic could destroy anything in its path. Frozen by the sudden advance of the Beaufort seapack ice in October 1931, the Bachimo's crew quickly realised their ship could not break free on its own. Supplies ran low, and the men faced a growing risk of frostbite, scurvy, and exhaustion. After several failed attempts to free her, Captain Cornwall ordered the crew to abandon ship temporarily. They left behind what they could carry, trusting that the vessel would not survive the winter. Yet when ice shifted and snowdrifts moved with the wind, the Bachimo remained intact, a silent steel monument to endurance. Before long, reports from Inuit hunters confirmed that the Bachimo had broken free from the ice and drifted farther into the Arctic waters. The crew and rescuers followed the trail, only to find her still afloat, remarkably preserved and completely unmanned. Cargo of furs remained in the hold, equipment untouched, and no life signs were evident. This sudden reappearance defied expectations, challenging the belief that ice and storm had rendered her nothing more than wreckage. Days later, another party attempted to board her, but worsening conditions forced a second abandonment. Yet even then, the Bachimo did not sink. She simply drifted, moving with currents and winds, sometimes sighted hundreds of miles from where she'd first become trapped. Her movements were slow and unpredictable, almost sentient, as though the ship had learned to navigate the Arctic on its own. The Hudson's Bay Company, impressed and baffled, recorded each sighting, yet no plan could guarantee her recovery. Throughout the decades, the Bachimo became a recurring presence in the Arctic Circle. Fishermen, trappers, and explorers alike reported encountering the ghostly ship, often seeing her drift silently among ice floes. Some described her as stationary yet afloat, her masts upright, sails tattered but still clinging to their spars. Others recalled observing the rusted grey hull cutting through the icy water, a ship that seemed to exist outside of time, immune to the decay that claimed all others in the harsh northern seas. Witnesses added credibility to the legend. In 1939, hunters near Wainwright saw her grounded briefly on an ice shelf, only to vanish months later. By 1955, miners and survey crews charted a vessel matching Bachimo's description near Point Barrow, still afloat and seemingly intact. Each report, separated by years and hundreds of miles, hinted at her enduring mystery. Logs and photographs documented encounters, but no one ever managed to reach her again. The ship had become an unclaimed phantom in the Arctic expanse. Over time, the Bachimo transcended simple maritime misfortune and entered folklore. She was dubbed the Ghost Ship of the Arctic, appearing in stories told in trading posts and Inuit villages alike. Sailors spoke of her silhouette at dusk, drifting silently against the cold horizon, and some insisted they had seen the ship's lights flicker on misty nights. While historians traced her origins and movements meticulously, the ship took on a symbolic life, embodying both human ingenuity and the unforgiving persistence of nature. Legends among local Inuit communities described the Bachimo not merely as a drifting ship, but as a restless presence in the Arctic night. Elders recounted stories of her appearing silently through fog or ice, sometimes followed by sudden, unexplained changes in the weather. Hunters and trappers claimed that ice would shift around her in ways that seemed unnatural, as if the vessel carried its own currents. These accounts, preserved orally for decades, imbued the Bachimo with a spectral life, bridging the gap between observed reality and a haunting, almost sentient force within the frozen Arctic. Researchers and maritime experts analysed the factors that could explain her extraordinary survival. The combination of reinforced steel, extreme cold-slowing corrosion, and polar currents contributing to her drift was considered. Even so, no scientific explanation could fully account for the Bachimo remaining intact and adrift for nearly 4 decades. Investigators noted that her cargo had never been completely salvaged, and the ship's repeated disappearances and reappearances baffled all attempts at logical resolution. Surveys conducted in the late 20th century using aerial reconnaissance and early satellite imaging occasionally picked up anomalies in the Beaufort Sea and surrounding ice fields that some researchers speculated might be remnants of the Bachimo. While none of these sightings could be confirmed, they prompted the Hudson's Bay Company and Arctic navigation authorities to re-evaluate shipping practices in seasonal ice zones. The ship's repeated unexplained survival highlighted the need for improved ice charts, emergency preparedness, and tracking of abandoned vessels, even as her exact fate remained as elusive as ever. Eventually, the last confirmed sighting in 1969 off the Alaskan coast marked the final entry in her official record. After that, she faded from documented history, though stories continued to circulate. Today, the Bechimo remains emblematic of the Arctic's enigmatic grip on human creations. She embodies a strange endurance, a vessel preserved by ice and memory, and a story that refuses to fully yield to explanation. A steel phantom drifting silently through endless ice, still waiting for a captain who will never return. The Lady Lovibond, 1748 Goodwin Sands, England. Celebration had filled the air aboard the Lady Lovibond as she embarked on her maiden voyage in February 1748, a vessel built for both elegance and speed. Her decks were polished, lanterns hung along the rails, and a sense of triumph accompanied the first glides through the waters off the Kent coast. The occasion was marked not only by pride in her craftsmanship but also by the wedding of Captain Simon Reed and his bride, a joyous union celebrated by friends and a small crew gathered for the voyage. Candles flickered through the cold evening, and laughter mingled with the gentle slap of waves, unaware that this night would etch itself into maritime legend. On the Thames, wealthy merchants commissioned the Lady Lovibond, a three-masted schooner of roughly 120 tons. She had been constructed in Deal, a shipbuilding town accustomed to producing vessels that could navigate the tricky channels along the English coastline. Designed for trading cargo, her hull was sleek, her sails optimized for speed, and her structure both light and resilient. Shipwrights praised her balance and grace, unaware that her maiden voyage would be her last in the mortal realm. Archival notes from Deal shipyards indicate that the Lady Lovibond's timbers were sourced from oak grown along the River Thames, prized for durability in northern seas. Shipwright records also note that the vessel was intended for both cargo transport and passenger carriage, reflecting the dual purpose common in 18th century English schooners, which may have influenced the decision to carry friends and family on her maiden voyage. On board, Captain Reed took pride not only in the vessel but in the companionship of those closest to him. The crew was small, experienced in navigating the treacherous southern North Sea, and eager to escort the ship safely across the English Channel. Among them were friends of the captain, celebratory passengers, and most importantly his young bride, whose presence would, according to legend, contribute to the superstition surrounding the Lady Lovibond's doom. The vessel, newly christened and gleaming, carried the hope of prosperity, marriage, and the promise of voyages yet to come. Setting conditions were deceptively calm as the Lady Lovibond approached the Goodwin Sands, a stretch of shifting sandbars off the coast of Kent, notorious for wrecking countless ships. The sands, sometimes visible at low tide and invisible at high, had a reputation among mariners for sudden and merciless capture. On that fateful night, a full moon illuminated the sea, and though the waters appeared serene, the hidden shoals of the Goodwin Sands lay in wait. Knowledge of the sand's treachery was widespread among sailors, yet the festive mood aboard the Lady Lovibond may have dulled caution. Collision came swiftly. Accounts suggest that as the schooner cut through the channel, a slight miscalculation or unexpected current drove her onto the sands. The hull struck sharply and the keel caught, immobilizing the ship while the tide pressed against her sides. Passengers reportedly panicked, though some tried to maintain order, clinging to rails and assisting those less steady on deck. Within moments, the Lady Lovibond was grounded, her timbers straining under the pressure of water and sand, and the ship that had been a symbol of celebration became a sight of calamity. The aftermath of the grounding was grim. Contemporary records indicate that the vessel was beyond saving. Efforts to refloat her failed, and she eventually broke apart as tides and storms battered the Goodwin Sands. The wedding celebration, once bright with promise, was now overshadowed by tragedy. Survivors were few, with some accounts suggesting that a small party made it to safety on lifeboats, while others were lost to the sandbars. News of the wreck spread quickly among mariners and coastal communities, embedding the Lady Lovibond in local memory not as a merchant vessel but as a cautionary tale of beauty undone by the sea. Whispers of her ghostly return began almost immediately. sailors and fishermen reported seeing a ship matching the Lady Lovibond's description sailing along the sands on the anniversary of her wreck. Some claimed the spectral vessel appeared fully intact, masts upright and sails unfurled, drifting silently in the early morning mist. The phenomenon was noted repeatedly in the 18th and 19th centuries, each report carrying the same eerie details: a ship that should have decayed decades earlier, yet moved as if unbroken, silently haunting the waters where her mortal life had ended. Testimonies recorded over the years provide a fascinating blend of observation and folklore. A fisherman in the 1790s described a vessel glowing faintly in the moonlight, her hull rising and falling with the tide, though no crew could be seen. Another account in the 1830s noted a schooner appearing for a few minutes off Deal, then vanishing into fog without a trace. Maritime historians who catalogued such sightings often found the details consistent, lending credibility to the possibility of repeated ghostly appearances. Even skeptics could not explain why a ship that sank centuries earlier would seem to return with such precision. Interpretations of Lady Lovibond's enduring presence vary. Some suggest that optical illusions over shifting sands created repeated sightings, while others argue that currents and wreckage could simulate movement at a distance. Superstitious mariners, however, embraced a darker reading that the ship's grounding had invoked a curse, perhaps linked to the wedding and the captain's decision to sail on a night fraught with ill omens. Historians examining period accounts note that the loss of life and cargo, combined with the timing of the disaster, may have contributed to a cultural memory that amplified the mystery into legend. The legacy of Lady Lovibond continues to resonate in maritime culture. Her story is recounted in coastal museums, nautical guides, and collections of ghost ship lore. The Goodwin Sands remain a hazard, but they are also a repository for tales that blur the line between reality and myth. For sailors and enthusiasts, the Lady Lovibond represents both the risks inherent in navigation and the persistent human fascination with ships that refuse to disappear, vessels that linger in the imagination as surely as they once did upon the waves. A spectral schooner glides silently over the sands, her sails full of a wind no one else can feel. The SV Bellamica 2006 Sardinia. The first hint of the Bellamica's mystery came not from radar or patrols, but from a small fishing village along Sardinia's jagged coast, where locals spotted a sleek white hull drifting near the rocks, unmanned yet perfectly upright. Its presence was out of place in a stretch of sea normally bustling with ferries and fishing vessels, and the fishermen could not explain why the yacht moved with such silent precision. When authorities finally boarded the vessel, they found every detail in perfect order: sails secured, navigation equipment operational, and supplies untouched as if the crew had vanished only moments before. Documents written in a strange, indecipherable script lay neatly on a table, hinting at secrets no one could immediately decode. The yacht, 38 feet in length and built for long-distance cruising, seemed prepared for a voyage, yet carried no one to command it. Inside the cabin, the air retained a faint scent of varnish and salt, an ordinary trace made eerie by the absence of life. Fresh fruit rested in the galley, frozen meals remained in the refrigerator, and bottled water was stacked in neat rows. Personal items, clothing, toiletries, and passports were left in place. Even the captain's leather-bound journal lay open on a shelf, its pages filled with routine navigational entries, occasionally interrupted by sketches of celestial constellations and cryptic diagrams that bore no resemblance to known maps. Linguists and cryptographers examined the mysterious script for months without success, confirming that it was not a recognizable European language. Investigators noted that the yacht's engine was in perfect working order, the fuel tank nearly full, capable of hundreds of nautical miles of travel. The sails and rigging were intact, with no evidence of storms or collisions. Even the inflatable dinghy remained tied securely to the stern, unused and ready for deployment. The total absence of human presence, paired with a fully operational yacht and abundant provisions, created a paradox that puzzled authorities. The crew had left neither in panic nor in haste, yet they were nowhere to be found. Nearby GPS logs added another layer to the enigma. The vessel's onboard system recorded a route from a marina near Porto Cervo, out into the Tyrrhenian Sea and back towards Sardinia's coastline, yet the logbook contained no indications of distress or unusual encounters. Local reports from the days prior told of a lone yacht sailing silently near La Maddalena, its hull glowing in the moonlight, apparently guided by no one. The accounts were inconsistent but suggested a pattern of unexplained movement, leaving researchers to wonder if the yacht had been adrift under its own momentum or influenced by some unknown force. The documents in the cabin drew particular attention. The characters were deliberate, neatly penned, and repeated in sequences that suggested a structured system of communication rather than random markings. Scholars debated whether they represented a lost linguistic code, an eccentric experiment, or something far more enigmatic. No cipher matched the patterns, and no historical precedent offered a clue. Even seasoned maritime historians described the writings as methodically precise, yet entirely incomprehensible, adding to the yacht's spectral aura. Coast Guard searches extended along the Sardinian coastline and nearby islands, but no trace of the crew was ever discovered. Sardinia's waters are heavily trafficked, making it unlikely that a yacht of the Bellamica's size could go unnoticed if its crew had abandoned ship or sought refuge on land. The total absence of human life, combined with the yacht's intact condition, transformed what could have been a simple missing person case into a persistent maritime mystery that continues to intrigue experts and ghost ship enthusiasts alike. Forensic examinations revealed no signs of tampering, fire, or collision. Even the engine's mechanics and electrical systems showed no irregularities. Investigators considered practical explanations, smuggling, clandestine operations, or foul play, yet none fit. No contraband, hidden compartments, or evidence of third-party interference were ever found. Everything aboard was orderly, functional, and meticulously maintained, leaving the case bereft of conventional explanations. The captain's journal remained a focal point for researchers. While most entries were mundane, documenting latitude, longitude, and course corrections, some included precise sketches of constellations and diagrams that did not correlate with known navigational charts. Analysts speculated whether these were intended to chart hidden islands, celestial patterns, or secret routes, yet no verification existed. The combination of routine logs with cryptic astronomical notation suggested a mind both disciplined and secretive, leaving the vessel's story suspended between ordinary navigation and something profoundly enigmatic. As the months passed, the SV Bellamica inspired fascination worldwide. International maritime organizations, cryptographers, and paranormal enthusiasts studied photographs, documents, and survivor testimonies, piecing together fragments of evidence. The mysterious language fueled speculation about lost societies, secret cults, or undiscovered codes. Some researchers attempted to connect the symbols to historical Mediterranean ciphers, while others proposed the writings were a modern invention, created for a purpose still unknown. The lack of a definitive translation only magnified the vessel's haunting reputation. The case of the Bellamica is unique not for what it sank or wrecked, but for the way it remained perfectly preserved and yet utterly empty. Every fact, the stocked galley, the functioning engine, the meticulous journals, the cryptic documents, and the unoccupied decks, serves to deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. Unlike other ghost ships, there were no bodies, no floating debris, no wreckage to examine. The yacht existed in a state of suspended certainty, its immaculate condition heightening the tension between the logical and the inexplicable. Those who have studied photographs of the Bellamica often remark on the uncanny stillness of its decks and the way the sunlight reflects off the white hull. The yacht seems to hover between presence and absence, between the world of the living and a hidden reality no one has accessed. Every detail, down to the neatly stowed ropes and the faint scent of varnish in the cabin, contributes to the sense that the vessel itself holds the answers silently for those willing to look. The Bellamica glides along Sardinia's jagged shores, carrying mysteries no one has yet unravelled. The Lyubov Orlova, 2013 North Atlantic. Once celebrated as a jewel of Soviet tourism, the Lyubov Orlova had been reduced to a drifting relic of a bygone era. Launched in the 1970s, the cruise ship had once carried travellers through the icy reaches of the Arctic and Baltic Seas, a floating showcase of opulent cabins, entertainment halls, and maritime engineering designed to endure harsh northern waters. By 2013, decades of service and economic decline had left it abandoned, slated for sale or scrapping. Its immense hull, over 3,000 tons in displacement, bore the weight of history, rusting quietly in port while its fate teetered between decay and disappearance. Its final voyage began quietly as it slipped away from the Newfoundland docks, bound for the Dominican Republic under the auspices of a salvage operation. Crew members had reportedly been minimal, overseeing preparations for towing and refitting, yet at some point along the North Atlantic currents, the ship slipped from human control. Satellite imagery would later suggest that the vessel drifted freely for months, its massive frame moving with uncanny steadiness, despite rough seas and prevailing winds that should have driven it aground or to ruin. Mariners reported seeing the vessel weeks later, moving steadily despite lacking any visible crew. Fishermen described a hulking shadow appearing on the horizon, enormous yet eerily still, its decks deserted, windows dark. Some observers noted the cries of gulls circling above the ship, as though the sea itself had claimed it as a monument to abandonment. No distress calls were sent, no flares fired, and the ship's radio remained silent, reinforcing the legend of a vessel utterly adrift yet structurally sound. The North Atlantic's winter currents and icy gales would normally doom a ship in such a state, yet the Orlova continued onward. Storms that might have broken apart smaller vessels seemed to bypass it, leaving it largely intact, with only superficial rust and seaweed marking its passage. Experts in maritime drift patterns expressed disbelief. A ship of this size, without propulsion or crew, should have succumbed to the violent waves, yet it persisted, defying conventional expectations of physics and human error. Boarding parties described the interior as a ghostly snapshot of life abruptly abandoned, with signs of rodents scuttling through deserted halls. Cabins were left unlocked, personal items scattered in ways that suggested routine habitation, yet no human presence remained. Electrical systems were inert, water tanks partially filled, and the galley contained untouched provisions, hinting that whoever had left had done so suddenly or with deliberate precision. Observers later noted that the lifeboats were missing or torn from their mountings, perhaps lost to waves, adding to the sense of peril that had somehow spared the main vessel. Maps marked with unusual waypoints and handwritten notes detailing fuel, hazards, and shipping lanes were uncovered by maritime investigators, though the handwriting proved inconsistent and often illegible. The ship's logbooks were missing key entries, particularly during the period when the vessel supposedly became unmoored. In addition, photographic evidence revealed the galley and dining halls still arranged as if for service, but with signs of gnawed food packaging, likely the work of the rats that had infested parts of the vessel. These details suggested a sudden, unexplained departure of any remaining human presence, adding yet another layer of mystery to a ship already enveloped in legend. Authorities attempted to intervene, dispatching crews and satellite teams to track or retrieve the vessel, but each effort revealed only more questions. Attempts to tow the ship proved difficult. The lines would snap under the strain of the North Atlantic currents, and storms sometimes scattered debris that complicated rescue operations. Maritime insurers documented the loss meticulously, but without a crew or a clear chain of custody, the vessel's drifting status made it nearly impossible to recover legally or practically. Remote sensors and satellite imagery confirmed the ship's relentless drift, moving independently of prevailing winds and currents in ways that baffled analysts. In one particularly puzzling observation, the vessel appeared to change direction slightly, rounding banks of fog and ice in a manner that seemed intentional. No engines were observed operating, and no radar signatures indicated human intervention, leaving specialists to question whether natural phenomena alone could account for its persistent trajectory. Explanations ranged from mechanical failure to deliberate abandonment, yet none accounted for the peculiar absence of any human trace. Some theorists suggested piracy, theft, or crew negligence, while others hypothesized that the ship had been caught in a series of rogue waves and left adrift. Still, the consistency of sightings, the ship's structural integrity, and the lack of debris challenged every conventional hypothesis. For sailors who had navigated these waters for decades, the Orlova became a cautionary tale of the sea's indifference and the fragility of human oversight. As word spread, the Lyubov Orlova became a symbol of maritime myth, cited in news reports and seafarers' tales alike. Articles appeared in newspapers across Europe and North America, each retelling emphasizing the eerie stillness of a massive cruise ship moving without guidance. Online forums and documentaries fueled speculation about ghostly crews, strange currents and abandoned technology, cementing its status in modern folklore as one of the most inexplicable ghost ships of the 21st century. Even seasoned sailors found it hard to reconcile the reports with reality, imagining the ship silently gliding across the waves without hands to guide it. The contrast between the Orlova's size, over 400 feet long with multiple decks, and its ghostly absence of life made it a vessel that seemed animated by forces beyond human comprehension. Some suggested that the ship itself had become a symbol, a floating monument to the dangers and mysteries of the North Atlantic, where ice, fog and storms hold sway over human endeavour. Fog and storm lent the vessel an almost spectral quality, its hull emerging and disappearing like a phantom in the North Atlantic gloom. Observers likened its decks to a frozen moment in time, tables still set, stairwells clear of debris, and corridors that once teemed with passengers now emptied to silence. The haunting imagery was compounded by occasional sightings of rats, presumed stowaways, scurrying through the cabins, giving the ship a fleeting, almost animate life of its own. The mystery endures, the Lyubov Orlova remaining a silent traveller across a sea that guards its secrets jealously. The SS Waratah, 1909 Indian Ocean. Passengers aboard the SS Waratah boarded with the confidence that only early 20th century ocean liners could inspire, their cabins prepared with polished wood and brass fittings, upholstered chairs, and neatly arranged personal effects. The ship's corridors echoed with the bustle of luggage, the shuffle of crew members, and the distant hum of steam engines preparing for departure. Families, businessmen and tourists had travelled from Durban to Cape Town, trusting in the vessel's reputation for reliability and luxury. Each passenger carried expectations of a smooth voyage, unaware that the southern Indian Ocean could conceal dangers even the most advanced liners could not withstand. The vessel departed Durban under clear skies, carrying hundreds of travellers and a crew accustomed to long voyages across the unpredictable southern waters. A sense of routine pervaded the deck, with passengers enjoying promenades and the view of the coastline gradually shrinking into the distance. Officers recorded standard navigational information, noting latitude, longitude and sea conditions, which appeared normal for the time of year. Despite a few isolated warnings of occasional swells, nothing suggested the imminent catastrophe that would define the Waratah's legacy. Designed for comfort and speed, the Waratah measured over 400 feet in length, with twin screws and powerful steam engines capable of maintaining steady progress against the region's currents. Its steel hull, reinforced for long passages, accommodated more than 200 passengers and a complement of officers and sailors trained in handling both commercial and hazardous cargo. Historians note that the ship carried a variety of goods, including live animals, crates of mail and industrial supplies, all meticulously documented, reflecting the meticulous operational standards of the Union Castle Line. The ship's engineering deck held clues that only closer examination could reveal. Investigators later studied the Waratah's blueprints and engine designs, noting that the twin steam engines were unusually powerful for a vessel of its class, capable of maintaining 16 knots under normal conditions. The fuel bunkers were fully stocked, and the watertight compartments appeared functional according to records, yet contemporary engineers debated whether a sudden list or rogue wave could have compromised stability. Some speculated that the ship's deep cargo holds, filled with heavy crates and mail, may have shifted during rough seas, creating conditions that would capsize even a modern liner. These technical details offered insight into the ship's resilience, yet they could not explain why no debris or trace of the vessel was ever recovered. Early reports noted moderate swells, but nothing that seemed unusual for the southern waters off South Africa's coast. Officer logs mention routine adjustments to course and speed, and passenger diaries record mild turbulence as merely a passing discomfort. However, letters and notes recovered after the ship's disappearance hinted an underlying unease among some crew members, a vague sense that the ocean in that season could shift suddenly and without warning, though no concrete evidence points to imminent disaster. By late evening, the ship vanished from sight and contact, leaving behind only a fragment of its planned journey. Radio communications, primitive as they were, contained no distress messages, and the last confirmed sighting placed the Waratah hundreds of miles from the nearest coastline. Within hours, family members and company officials began to realize that something extraordinary had occurred, yet the exact moment and cause of the disappearance remained impossible to pinpoint. Search parties scoured the area for weeks, yet no debris, lifeboats or bodies were ever recovered, baffling authorities and family members alike. Naval vessels combed the Indian Ocean, deploying nets and examining shipping lanes, while reports were sent to international maritime organizations. Each investigation returned empty-handed, with only minor flotsam occasionally reported but never linked conclusively to the Waratah. The thoroughness of these searches underscored the total absence of physical evidence, heightening the ship's ghostly reputation. Sailors on other vessels recalled spotting a large liner moving steadily, yet their accounts conflicted in timing and direction, adding to the uncertainty. Some claimed to see the Waratah cutting through foggy waters with lights glinting against steel, while others reported glimpses of a dark silhouette disappearing into the horizon. The discrepancies in these observations reinforced the sense that the ship had entered a space both literal and psychological, leaving witnesses unsure whether they had glimpsed a real vessel or an apparition of memory and expectation. Storms, hidden reefs, or mechanical failure were considered, but none could fully explain the Waratah's disappearance without leaving a trace. Engineers debated the ship's design, noting that while it had been considered stable and seaworthy, certain calculations suggested it might have been vulnerable in extreme swells or when heavily loaded. Yet the complete absence of wreckage or survivors left no evidence to support even these technical hypotheses, ensuring that each new theory remained speculative. Shipping company records and insurance documents meticulously catalogued the passengers and cargo, yet even these detailed logs could not resolve the question of the ship's fate. Investigators combed through manifests and correspondence, reconstructing schedules, cargo weights, and port histories. The careful documentation emphasized the improbability of human error as the sole cause, suggesting instead a disappearance that challenged both maritime expertise and conventional understanding of oceanic hazards. Historians have debated the event for over a century, noting that the total absence of wreckage has fueled speculation and maritime legend. In South African newspapers of the time, some articles portrayed the Waratah as cursed or ill-fated, while later accounts leaned toward mechanical explanations or extreme weather events. Modern researchers continue to analyze currents, wind patterns, and survivor accounts from contemporary voyages to approximate where the ship might have gone, yet no definitive conclusions have emerged. Tales of a phantom vessel haunting the Indian Ocean have persisted among sailors, describing glimpses of a grand liner appearing from fog or distant horizons. Some legends suggest that the Waratah occasionally drifts silently into shipping lanes before vanishing, a spectral presence that reminds mariners of the ocean's capacity to erase even the largest of human creations. While these stories cannot be verified, they reflect the enduring impact of the ship's disappearance on maritime culture and collective imagination. The SS Waratah remains a ghost not only in the annals of maritime history, but in the imagination of all who study the mysteries of the sea. Flight 19, 1945, Bermuda Triangle. Flight 19 was scheduled as a routine training exercise, a familiar pattern of maneuvers over the Atlantic designed to hone the skills of young naval aviators. The mission followed standard Navy protocols, with each pilot aware of their assigned grid over the open ocean, a region known for its unpredictable currents and sudden weather shifts. Despite being labelled a training flight, the vastness of the Atlantic demanded focus and discipline, and the young men of Flight 19 approached their task with a mixture of professionalism and the subtle tension inherent to any prolonged mission over water. 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers lined up on the runway, each crewed by men whose experience ranged from seasoned combat missions to their first extended flights over open water. Their leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, was a veteran pilot responsible for coordinating the formation's movements and ensuring that inexperienced aviators adhered to navigational instructions. Each aircraft carried 2 or 3 men, combining pilots, navigators, and gunners, their roles rehearsed and critical for the exercise's success. Manuals and pre-flight briefings emphasized the Atlantic's potential hazards, yet none could predict what was about to unfold. Lieutenant Charles Taylor had compiled a meticulous flight plan, one that followed Navy protocols for training navigators over open water. The plan outlined a series of triangular patterns intended to train pilots in dead reckoning navigation, covering hundreds of miles without relying on visual landmarks. Each Avenger was equipped with standard instrumentation of the era: magnetic compasses, airspeed indicators, altimeters, and basic radio transmitters. However, testimony from surviving control tower staff later suggested that slight deviations in compass readings, possibly influenced by magnetic anomalies, may have compounded small errors into large miscalculations. The combination of training rigor and equipment limitations framed the mysterious conditions that would lead to the squadron's disappearance. The aircraft lifted from Fort Lauderdale under a clear sky, climbing steadily into the vastness of the Atlantic, their paths set along a standard training grid. The sun glinted off the plane's metallic surfaces, casting reflections across the water that extended to the horizon. Observers on shore watched as the formation ascended in perfect alignment, engines humming in synchrony, unaware that within hours the squadron would confront circumstances beyond human expectation. Initial radio communications confirmed the squadron's bearings and altitude, the pilots reporting routine observations and minor course adjustments. Lieutenant Taylor relayed information about wind speeds, cloud cover, and fuel levels, all consistent with the projected flight plan. Ground control received updates at regular intervals, noting no irregularities, and assumed that the young aviators were following their grid as instructed. By mid-flight, discrepancies in compass readings and unexpected cloud formations began to sow uncertainty among the formation's leaders. Taylor reported that his instruments suggested a gradual drift eastward, a dissonance with the visual horizon and the known location of islands in the region. Other pilots echoed his concerns, noting that landmarks they expected to see were missing, obscured by fog, or perhaps never within sight. The ocean below remained featureless, a vast expanse offering no reassurance. Eyewitnesses on other flights and at coastal stations reported strange radio transmissions in the hours following Flight 19's departure. Radio operators logged garbled messages from the squadron, sometimes repeating coordinates that contradicted earlier reports, or appearing in languages partially understood only by experienced signal officers. One operator recorded the anxious tone of Lieutenant Taylor's voice, noting his repeated references to a lost horizon and inability to determine position. These transmissions, preserved in military archives, remain one of the few tangible traces of the squadron, yet they offered no definitive information about the plane's location or fate, deepening the enigma of Flight 19. Lieutenant Charles Taylor's voice over the radio grew tense as he relayed the squadron's growing confusion and the inability to reconcile instruments with visual landmarks. Several planes reported compass malfunctions, with needles swinging erratically or locking in inconsistent directions. Taylor attempted to guide the formation back to Fort Lauderdale, but miscalculations compounded the uncertainty, and the pilots found themselves increasingly disoriented over open water. Meteorological records from the day reveal conditions that may have contributed to the squadron's disorientation. While skies were reportedly clear at Fort Lauderdale, data from nearby ships and coastal stations suggest pockets of dense fog, sudden squalls, and unpredictable gusts in the central Bermuda Triangle region. Cold and warm air currents colliding over the Gulf Stream could have produced turbulent pockets invisible to the pilots. Naval analysts later hypothesized that such conditions, combined with limited visibility and faulty compass readings, could have caused the bombers to fly in circles over open water until fuel exhaustion forced them to ditch, leaving no survivors or wreckage. The records provide context but still fail to fully explain the total disappearance. The Navy quickly dispatched ships and aircraft to locate Flight 19, aware that even a short delay over open water could prove fatal. Rescue teams combed the Atlantic for signs of the missing bombers, deploying vessels along the expected flight path and dispatching additional planes to triangulate possible locations. The search was complicated by the fact that the precise last known coordinates were themselves uncertain, and each minute that passed diminished the likelihood of recovery. Search teams faced relentless challenges, from turbulent seas to disappearing radio signals, and the loss of a PBM Mariner rescue plane added further tragedy to the unfolding operation. The Mariner exploded mid-flight under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind only a small field of debris and deepening the shadow cast by Flight 19. For families and naval officers, hope gave way to despair as multiple lives vanished without warning, leaving the Atlantic a vast stage for unanswered questions. Investigators proposed explanations ranging from navigational error to extreme atmospheric phenomena, yet none could fully account for the disappearance of all 5 bombers. Some argued that magnetic anomalies in the Bermuda Triangle region could have interfered with compasses, while others noted sudden microbursts or unrecorded storms as potential factors. However, post-war analyses revealed that the pilots had experienced navigating similar conditions, and the total absence of wreckage left these explanations unverified. Over time, Flight 19 became synonymous with the Bermuda Triangle itself, its story retold in newspapers, military records, and maritime lore. Authors, historians, and mystery enthusiasts debated the event for decades, using it as a cautionary tale of the ocean's indifference to human technology and training. The narrative shifted between documented fact, plane types, crew names, mission logs, and legend, blending reality with a sense of ominous inevitability. From above, the Atlantic stretched endlessly, an empty canvas against which the vanished planes left no trace, only whispers of their passage. Clouds rolled in low, and gusts of wind could easily conceal the faintest disturbance in the water below. For decades, sailors and pilots alike have reported eerie sensations in the same region, recalling sudden instrument malfunctions or fleeting silhouettes of aircraft that vanish before they can be verified. The fate of Flight 19 remains a puzzle, a void in the sky where experience, technology, and human skill all failed to pierce the unknown. The Cyclops, 1918, Bermuda Triangle. The USS Cyclops served a vital role in the US Navy's logistical operations during the final year of World War I. As a collier tasked with transporting coal and other essential supplies to naval bases along the Atlantic seaboard, the ship carried a responsibility far beyond that of a standard cargo vessel. Every voyage had implications for fuel availability, fleet readiness, and the broader war effort. Despite its mundane classification as a supply ship, the Cyclops represented a critical link in the chain of operations that sustained a global conflict, and its disappearance would leave a gap in both logistics and legend. Built in 1910, the collier stretched nearly 540 feet in length, powered by a triple expansion steam engine and manned by a crew exceeding 300 men. The steel hull was reinforced for long ocean voyages, and the deck housed both living quarters and cargo handling equipment. Officers and sailors were trained in navigation, engine maintenance, and emergency procedures, yet the sheer size of the ship and its full cargo load demanded constant vigilance. Maritime historians note that the Cyclops was considered one of the largest US vessels operating at the time, a floating city of coal and machinery, whose disappearance would confound even the most experienced mariners. The vessel departed from the port of Barbados, charting a course for Baltimore, carrying thousands of tons of coal essential for naval operations. Its journey followed established shipping lanes, though wartime measures occasionally required adjustments to avoid enemy submarines or naval patrols. Crew schedules were meticulously planned, and officers maintained logs of every aspect of the voyage, from weather conditions to engine performance. Yet even the most precise planning could not account for the uncertainty of the Atlantic, a realm where a single miscalculation could become catastrophic. Coal, loaded into multiple holds, filled the ship, its weight meticulously calculated but difficult to stabilize over a long ocean voyage. Historical records indicate that the total cargo exceeded 10,000 tons, and while distributed across several compartments, the density created a top-heavy effect under certain conditions. Mariners at the time knew that poorly secured or uneven cargo could exacerbate instability during heavy swells, though the Cyclops had passed stability inspections before departure. The very coal that sustained the fleet may have been among the factors that contributed to its sudden vanishing. The Cyclops engine logs, preserved in naval archives, reveal a ship operating at full capacity throughout its voyage. Records indicate that the triple expansion steam engines were maintained at near maximum output to ensure the timely delivery of coal, pushing boilers to their operational limits. Engineers routinely adjusted valves and monitored pressure gauges, aware that any malfunction could endanger both the ship and crew. Maritime historians note that vessels of similar size occasionally suffered boiler strain under full loads, which could cause catastrophic failure if compounded by rough seas or uneven cargo weight. These technical details underscore the precarious balance between human engineering and the unpredictable forces of the Atlantic, highlighting just how vulnerable even the largest collier could be in wartime conditions. For the first several days, the seas remained calm and crew members reported no issues with steering or engine performance. Logs recorded steady progress, and the ship maintained its intended course without incident. Officers noted routine maintenance tasks, and morale among the crew appeared normal. Yet despite these seemingly ordinary conditions, the Cyclops entered a region historically known for sudden storms and treacherous currents, a stretch of ocean that would later be associated with numerous unexplained disappearances. By March 4th, 1918, the Cyclops vanished from radar and sight, leaving behind neither distress signals nor floating debris. Communications from the ship had ceased abruptly, and attempts to contact the vessel via radio yielded nothing. Naval authorities initially assumed the possibility of a minor mechanical failure or storm damage, yet as days turned into weeks without any sign of wreckage or survivors, it became apparent that this was no ordinary maritime incident. The sheer absence of evidence magnified the mystery surrounding the ship. Naval search parties scoured the region for weeks, yet the immense expanse of the Atlantic yielded no trace of the ship. Battleships and smaller vessels combed the expected route, while naval officers compiled data from passing merchant ships in the hope of identifying debris or survivors. Despite their efforts, the vastness of the ocean combined with wartime secrecy about enemy submarine activity meant that the Cyclops' fate remained entirely unknown. Even modern analysis of currents and drift patterns has failed to reconcile the disappearance with any plausible endpoint. Investigators considered every possibility, from catastrophic structural failure and shifting cargo to violent storms and enemy submarine attack. Structural assessments noted that the hull had withstood previous voyages under similar conditions, while the coal cargo could have shifted during unexpected turbulence. Some theorists proposed that a rogue wave, a phenomenon not fully understood at the time, might have overwhelmed the vessel. Others speculated that a German U-boat operating in the region may have engaged the Cyclops, though no wartime records confirm an attack. Each hypothesis is supported by fragments of fact, yet none fully explains the total disappearance. Official naval records, insurance documents, and wartime communications noted the disappearance, yet none offered a definitive explanation. Logs from ships in nearby shipping lanes recorded nothing unusual, and insurance claims highlighted the loss of both ship and cargo as a singular event. Intelligence reports from the period reference the Cyclops only in passing, noting its failure to arrive at Baltimore and the mysterious circumstances surrounding its vanishing. These documents preserve factual detail yet deepen the sense of an unresolved enigma. Over decades, the absence of wreckage and survivors has transformed the Cyclops into one of the most enduring maritime enigmas. Historians and maritime enthusiasts alike continue to analyse the ship's construction, cargo, and voyage in an attempt to reconcile its disappearance with known oceanic and meteorological conditions. The lack of physical evidence has allowed speculation to flourish, elevating the Cyclops from a wartime logistical loss to a legendary fixture of the Bermuda Triangle lore. Sailors in the Bermuda Triangle region report lingering tales of a massive collier, its shadowy outline glimpsed in fog or on the horizon, never confirmed yet never forgotten. Some describe lights flickering briefly on the deck, others recall distant engine sounds that fade without a source. These stories, while anecdotal, echo the same unresolved questions that have haunted researchers for over a century. How a ship of such size and preparation could vanish without a trace in a part of the ocean that, even today, challenges comprehension. No trace has ever surfaced, and the Cyclops drifts eternally in the ocean's silent expanse. The HMS Erebus and Terror, 1845 Arctic expedition. In 1845, Sir John Franklin set out to navigate the elusive Northwest Passage, a journey that promised discovery and peril in equal measure. Tasked with mapping a viable maritime route through the Arctic, Franklin's expedition was one of the most ambitious undertakings of the era, combining exploration with scientific observation. The venture carried hopes of extending British naval influence while advancing knowledge of Arctic geography, meteorology, and oceanography. Yet even with meticulous preparation, the journey would plunge into mystery and tragedy, leaving a legacy that endured for centuries. The HMS Erebus and Terror were reinforced for Arctic conditions, each vessel carrying over 100 men, ample provisions and experimental technologies of the age. Both ships had been retrofitted with iron plating along the hull and strengthened decks to withstand heavy ice. Steam engines complemented traditional sails, allowing maneuverability when winds failed or ice threatened. Officers and crew were trained in navigation, survival, and Arctic conditions, and the vessels carried 3 years' worth of food, coal, and supplies. Despite these preparations, the environment itself posed an adversary beyond human engineering. Detailed inventories of the ships reveal the extraordinary measures taken to sustain life in the Arctic's isolation. The Erebus and Terror carried specialized supplies, including preserved meats, flour, hardtack, and barrels of salted vegetables, alongside sledges, tents, and scientific instruments for mapping and observation. Medical kits contained opium, calomel, and early antiseptics, while onboard libraries offered reference texts for navigation and natural history. These preparations reflect the meticulous planning of mid-19th century polar expeditions, yet even such extensive provisioning could not compensate for months trapped in ice and the extreme strain on both crew and vessels. The logs and inventories now serve as vital records, illustrating the daily lives of the men and the daunting challenges they faced in a frozen, hostile world. Departing from England, the expedition initially followed well-charted waters, though icy conditions soon made even familiar routes treacherous. Franklin's fleet sailed through the Atlantic and into the Labrador Sea, navigating alongside icebergs that drifted silently toward warmer currents. The men observed Arctic wildlife, from seals to polar bears, recording sightings for scientific records. Early progress suggested the expedition could succeed, but the harsh realities of the polar north gradually imposed themselves. Throughout the voyage, Arctic storms and shifting ice floes tested the ship's hulls and the crew's endurance, offering no reprieve from the frozen expanse. Temperatures often plunged below freezing ropes and making deck work perilous. Storms could appear without warning, battering the ships with snow, sleet, and high winds. Even with reinforced hulls, the constant pressure of drifting ice threatened structural integrity, forcing the crew into grueling routines to prevent damage and ensure navigational accuracy. The most seasoned sailors found themselves succumbing to frostbite and exhaustion, their bodies tested by the relentless cold and treacherous ice. As they ventured deeper into the Arctic, the explorers faced growing uncertainty, forced to choose between advancing into unknown waters or retreating to safer channels. Supply calculations became critical. Each day delayed consumed coal, food, and hope. Some officers advocated cautious progress, while Franklin remained determined to complete the mission. Logbooks reveal careful plotting of courses, yet ice conditions made precision impossible. The frozen landscape offered no landmarks, only white expanses and shifting shadows. Messages from the expedition became scarce, and the last reliable sightings left officers and historians alike with more questions than answers. Once beyond Baffin Bay, the ships vanished from European observation, and no letters or dispatches reached England with updates on their position. Initial reports from distant whaling vessels provided glimpses of Erebus and Terror, but these sightings grew infrequent and ultimately ceased. The world waited, uncertain whether the explorers had merely delayed or vanished entirely. Search missions launched in the years following the disappearance yielded fragmented evidence and compelling, if incomplete, accounts from Inuit witnesses. Tools, clothing, and abandoned sleds were discovered far from the intended route, suggesting that crew members attempted overland escape after abandoning the icebound vessels. Inuit oral histories described emaciated men trudging across snowfields, some succumbing to exhaustion or the elements. These accounts, combined with scattered artifacts, painted a grim picture of survival against unrelenting conditions. It was only decades later that expeditions revealed the wrecks and artifacts, offering haunting glimpses of life aboard and the crew's relentless suffering. In 2014, the wreck of HMS Erebus was confirmed in the Victoria Strait, followed by the discovery of HMS Terror in 2016. Examination of the hulls, personal belongings, and navigational instruments offered clues to the challenges faced, including ice compression, structural fatigue, and the difficulties of Arctic navigation. Artifacts such as preserved journals and utensils suggest that crew members attempted to maintain routine and morale, even as conditions deteriorated. Historians and scientists proposed numerous theories to explain the expedition's fate, from entrapment in ice to scurvy and lead poisoning. Lead from poorly soldered food tins may have impaired decision-making, while scurvy weakened men unable to access fresh provisions. Arctic ice trapped both ships for months, leaving them immobilized in an unforgiving environment. Starvation, exposure, and disease likely compounded these risks, yet no single explanation accounts fully for the disappearance, leaving the story shrouded in uncertainty. Archaeological evidence, including personal items and ship components, offers clues about the crew's movements and final struggles within the ice. Clothing with signs of wear, sled remnants, and scattered belongings indicate attempts at evacuation. The placement of artifacts inside and near the wrecks suggests that men may have sought shelter or carried essential tools on foot. These discoveries illuminate fragments of daily life and the extreme measures taken to survive, though the majority of the crew's fate remains unknown. The Lost expedition has since become a cultural touchstone, symbolizing both human ambition and the Arctic's unforgiving mysteries. Franklin's voyage inspired subsequent explorations, literature, and debates over navigation, shipbuilding, and survival strategies in polar regions. The expedition's story lingers in museums, academic studies, and popular lore, bridging the gap between a documented history and the haunting unknown. Though the wrecks have been found, the Arctic still guards its deepest secrets, and many who sailed with Franklin remain lost to time. The Seabird, 1750 Rhode Island. In the mid-18th century, Rhode Island bustled with maritime trade, ships departing daily to ports along the Atlantic coast. Merchants relied on sturdy vessels to transport lumber, rum, molasses and other goods, while sailors navigated familiar routes that had been mapped and travelled for decades. The rhythm of life revolved around tides, trade winds, and the unpredictable Atlantic, yet even in this routine, the sea retained a capacity for mystery, and the disappearance of the Seabird would remind all who watched it that not every voyage ended predictably. The Seabird was a modest merchant vessel, measuring roughly 60 feet in length and equipped with a single mast and square sails, carrying a small crew of 10 men under the command of an experienced captain. Its hull, constructed from oak, had been treated with pitch to withstand the salt water, and the hold was packed with barrels of molasses, sacks of flour, and crates of trade goods destined for northern ports. For a vessel of its size, it was well provisioned, carrying tools, spare rigging, and basic medical supplies, reflecting the care taken in planning even short coastal voyages. On its final voyage, the ship set sail under clear skies, with officers following standard routes to deliver goods northward. The crew, familiar with these waters, maintained routine shifts, adjusting sails and monitoring for any changes in wind or tide. The captain, a man known for his meticulous record-keeping, ensured that the ship's log was up to date, documenting weather, sightings of other vessels, and daily activities aboard the Seabird. Everything appeared ordinary, yet the Atlantic has long been a realm where the ordinary can shift abruptly into the inexplicable. It was local fishermen who first noticed the Seabird drifting unnervingly close to shore, its deck strangely devoid of human presence. Some initially assumed the crew had gone ashore temporarily, yet no footprints led away from the ship and no signal fires or smoke indicated human activity. The vessel, fully intact, floated quietly near a small cove, swaying gently with the current, as if guided by unseen hands. The sight unsettled the fishermen, who had grown accustomed to the rhythms of the coast and the predictable patterns of merchant traffic. Cargo barrels and crates remained untouched, while navigational equipment and sails appeared in perfect order, as if the crew had vanished mid-task. The ship's wheel stood unturned, charts lay open on the deck table, and ropes were coiled neatly, giving the impression that no struggle had occurred. Even the anchor had been left suspended, its chain taut but unfastened. Historians note that such conditions are rarely seen when a ship meets a natural disaster. Typically, cargo is scattered, sails torn, or equipment damaged. The Seabird defied these expectations, its serenity amplifying the mystery. Records indicate the ship had been carrying several barrels of salted fish, a staple cargo along the Rhode Island coast, all untouched when the vessel was found. Curiously, the captain's loyal dog remained aboard, wandering the deck, the sole witness to whatever had transpired. Contemporary accounts describe the animal as pacing anxiously, occasionally barking at the shore as if signalling distress or attempting to summon help. This solitary presence added a humanizing and eerie dimension to the scene, suggesting a connection between the absent crew and the vessel's lone companion. The dog's behaviour became a point of fascination in local narratives, reinforcing the sense that the ship was not merely empty but inhabited by a lingering presence. Villagers recounted seeing the ship silently approach the shore in the early morning fog, its movement almost deliberate, yet with no sound of human activity. Some claimed that the sails appeared to catch no wind, yet the ship advanced steadily, as if propelled by invisible forces. The reports passed down through diaries and letters capture the atmosphere of unease that the seabird inspired. Observers were left questioning whether natural currents alone could account for the ship's movements, or if some other inexplicable phenomenon was at play. Authorities and maritime inspectors investigated the scene, yet official records provide little insight into the crew's fate. Written accounts note that the vessel was seaworthy, with no evidence of external attack or structural failure. Despite interviews with nearby sailors and examination of the ship's logbooks, no plausible explanation emerged. Colonial authorities could only confirm that the crew had vanished without a trace, leaving the vessel, its cargo, and the captain's dog as the sole evidence of the voyage that had begun ordinarily but ended in mystery. Theories abound, from violent storms and sudden illness to piracy or desertion, yet each remains speculative without corroborating evidence. Some historians suggest that a freak squall or rogue wave may have swept the crew overboard, while others propose that a contagious illness prompted a sudden evacuation or abandonment. Piracy, while plausible in the era, seems unlikely given the intact cargo and lack of signs of struggle. Each hypothesis is supported by fragments of fact, yet none fully explains why the vessel remained fully operational and orderly. Over time, the seabird entered local lore, a cautionary tale whispered among sailors and merchants, wary of sudden maritime disappearances, tales of ghostly lights on deck, eerie creaking of rigging at night, and the dog's restless pacing became part of the region's maritime folklore. The vessel's story was recounted in taverns, logbooks, and letters, emphasizing both the inexplicable nature of its discovery and the human fascination with a ship that seemed alive yet devoid of its crew. Even decades later, the image of a ship afloat and empty endured, a symbol of the ocean's capacity to swallow lives without explanation. Scholars examining records from the period note that the seabird story influenced the perception of coastal shipping risks, reinforcing caution among mariners while fueling speculation about supernatural or unknown natural forces. Its legacy persists not as a tale of shipwreck or loss, but as a quiet, unresolved enigma. Generations have watched the waters where the seabird drifted, yet the crew's disappearance remains a secret the ocean refuses to reveal. The Zabrina, 1917, English Channel. Fishermen first spotted a lone schooner, her sails slack and deck eerily empty, drifting near the English coast. The morning mist hung low over the water, and the small vessels of local trawlers had to manoeuvre carefully to avoid colliding with the ghostly silhouette. The sudden appearance of the Zabrina stirred unease among those who had spent their lives on these familiar waters, for it was rare to see a ship abandoned yet perfectly afloat. Its movement, dictated by the tide and wind, seemed almost deliberate, a silent intruder in a stretch of sea they thought they knew. The Zabrina, a modest timber schooner, carried a small crew of 7 and goods intended for northern ports. Measuring approximately 75 feet in length with a shallow draft, it had been constructed for coastal trade and transport during wartime. Its hold contained timber planks, sacks of grain, and barrels of salted fish, cargo that was crucial to supply lines along the English coast. The vessel's rigging and sails had been maintained with care, and its simple design allowed a small crew to navigate efficiently, yet no evidence suggested that the crew had abandoned it under normal circumstances. Its last confirmed voyage had followed familiar shipping lanes, delivering supplies under the pressures of wartime commerce. The captain, a man experienced in both coastal navigation and the perils of 1917 seas, had departed from a southern English port under clear skies, unaware that his vessel would become a subject of lasting mystery. Routine logs and reports from other ships in the convoy indicated that the Zabrina was in good condition for the journey ahead, and there were no recorded signs of distress or mechanical failure in the early hours of the voyage. Observers noted the ship's movement was unnervingly smooth, as though guided by invisible hands rather than wind or current. Small boats in the vicinity reported that it seemed to glide unnaturally, with no waves breaking against its hull in a manner consistent with ordinary drifting. The fishermen and coastal lookouts described an eerie calm, one that contrasted sharply with the rough waters often experienced along the channel. Even seasoned mariners could not explain the sensation that the ship was somehow alive yet devoid of life, a paradox that deepened the mystery. Aboard, the cargo remained stacked neatly, ropes coiled and sails untorn, revealing no signs of struggle or disaster. Timber and grain sacks were positioned exactly as they had been loaded, and the ship's wheel stood unmoved. Navigational instruments and charts lay untouched, and the anchor remained unfastened but secured. Such an order is rarely preserved in maritime accidents, where cargo often shifts, sails tear and rigging is damaged. The Zabrina's immaculate state suggested a sudden and inexplicable departure of the crew, rather than a conventional shipwreck or mishap. The ship's bell, still mounted at the bow, had not been rung, leaving the eerie impression that time aboard the vessel had simply paused. The crew's absence was immediate and absolute, leaving the vessel a ghostly silhouette against the morning sky. No life appeared on deck, no signals or cries were heard. Even the personal effects of sailors, coats, lanterns and navigational tools remained in place. Historians later noted that in the context of wartime shipping, an abandoned vessel was unusual enough, but one showing no signs of struggle or panic was virtually unheard of. The image of a fully operational ship with no living souls aboard haunted the imagination of those who first encountered it. Naval inspectors and local authorities examined the schooner, yet every inquiry led only to questions, not answers. The ship was towed to a nearby dock for closer inspection, but investigators could find no evidence of collision, sabotage or attack. Daily logs, cargo inventories and structural assessments revealed nothing amiss. Even the deck planks showed no indication that crew members had been forcibly removed or swept overboard. Officials could only record the facts as they found them, leaving the disappearance an open question in naval reports. Enemy patrols and reports of submarine activity offered no clues, and no link could be made to hostile action. While the channel was patrolled and mined during the ongoing war, the location of the Zabrina and the lack of damage made enemy involvement unlikely. Mines and torpedoes left unmistakable traces, hulls breached, debris scattered, but the schooner remained fully intact. The wartime setting added tension and suspicion, yet it could not explain why 7 men vanished completely while their vessel drifted silently. Some theories suggest sudden illness, rogue waves, mutiny, or even unknown forces as possible explanations. A freak wave or unexpected squall might have swept the crew overboard, yet logs and meteorological records indicate calm conditions at the time. Mutiny or desertion seems improbable given the ship's small size, intact cargo, and absence of conflict signs. Local folklore would later hint at supernatural explanations, though such ideas remain speculative. The lack of concrete evidence continues to fuel debate among maritime scholars and enthusiasts. Contemporary newspapers and naval journals recounted the incident with a blend of fact and conjecture, capturing the unease it inspired. Headlines emphasized the uncanny nature of the ship's discovery, while editorial accounts speculated about ghost ships, enemy action, or bizarre accidents. Correspondence from nearby ports included letters describing sightings of the vessel drifting silently before authorities located it. These documents, preserved in archives, offer both factual insight and a window into the human fascination with unexplained maritime events. Seafarers told tales of a silent vessel appearing and vanishing along the channel without warning, embedding the story in coastal lore. Fishermen avoided the area when conditions were foggy, claiming they could sense the Zabrina's presence even when it was out of sight. The ship became emblematic of the unpredictable and sometimes menacing nature of the sea, a warning that even routine coastal waters could conceal mysteries. Generations of sailors passed down stories of a ship that seemed to drift with purpose, yet with no crew to guide it. The Zabrina remains a haunting emblem of the sea's power to claim lives and conceal its secrets. The HMS Resolute, 1854, Arctic Ocean. Amid the vast Arctic ice, a ship emerged, frozen in time and drifting far from familiar waters. Sailors aboard passing vessels were struck by the strange sight. A fully intact bark, its masts upright, sails furled, yet no human life visible on deck. The morning light reflected off the ice, illuminating a vessel that seemed suspended between worlds, neither lost entirely nor at rest. News of the ship spread quickly among Arctic convoys, and curiosity mingled with unease as questions arose about how a vessel could drift so far and remain untouched for months. The HMS Resolute was a sturdy wooden bark, built for long voyages, equipped with 24 guns and a crew of 173. Constructed at Henry Gristle's shipyard in London, it was designed for resilience in the harshest seas, its hull reinforced and rigging robust enough to withstand Arctic gales. Officers prized the vessel for its capacity to carry supplies and personnel across treacherous waters, and its design reflected the era's pinnacle of naval craftsmanship. From the deck fittings to the figurehead at the bow, every aspect conveyed a balance of utility and elegance, making it a vessel of both function and admiration. Its mission had been to search for missing expeditions in the unforgiving Arctic, a task that tested every seam of the ship and every sailor aboard. Following the disappearance of Sir John Franklin's 2 ships, Resolute set out as part of a squadron intended to locate the lost crew and survey the ice-laden passages of the Canadian Arctic. The challenges were formidable. Temperatures plummeted well below freezing, ice fields shifted unpredictably, and storms could arrive without warning. Sailors contended with frostbite, scurvy, and the psychological strain of endless white horizons, yet they remained vigilant, logging positions and charting routes in the hope of discovery. The abandonment of the Resolute was conducted with caution and care, its crew taking lifeboats and provisions into the ice, leaving the vessel seemingly forsaken. Records indicate that, after becoming trapped in pack ice, the ship was no longer manoeuvrable, forcing Captain Kellett and his men to evacuate safely with supplies and sledges. They left signals indicating their location and secured as many instruments as possible, yet the decision to leave a fully seaworthy vessel behind created a mystery that would endure for years. Salvagers who found the ship months later marvelled at its condition, noting minimal ice damage and remarkably preserved navigational logs. The deck was coated with frost but showed no splintering, the hull intact and the masts unbroken. Chronometers and charts were discovered in their proper places, and remarkably, stores of preserved food had survived the icy drift. Those who boarded the vessel could hardly believe the resilience of the Resolute against the punishing Arctic environment, suggesting a combination of superior construction and fortuitous circumstance had preserved it almost perfectly. What became of the original crew remains unknown, recorded only in scattered accounts from companion expeditions and Inuit observers. Accounts suggest the men trekked over ice and snow, signalling passing parties when possible, and eventually reached safety, yet the ship itself continued its unpiloted voyage south. The absence of humans aboard contrasted sharply with the vessel's complete preservation, heightening the aura of the Resolute as a ghost ship in frozen waters. Towing the vessel through shifting ice fields required ingenuity, ropes, and human effort that transformed the frozen schooner into a moving testament of survival. Crews worked for weeks to extricate the ship from entangling ice floes, using anchors, chains, and manpower to guide her into navigable waters. Each movement had to be carefully calculated to prevent cracking the hull or damaging the masts. The effort combined practical seamanship with endurance, yet even as humans exerted control, the ship's prior drift remained a silent reminder of its mysterious journey. The Resolute's journey back to Britain covered thousands of miles, guided by currents, human hands, and the fortuitous timing of ice breakups. Weathered but intact, the vessel passed through the open waters of the Atlantic, a rare survivor of the Arctic's frozen grip. Sailors aboard merchant vessels and Royal Navy ships noted her presence, admiring her steadfast construction and imagining the story she carried from the northern ice fields. The long voyage underscored both the vessel's durability and the strange fate that had brought it home. Refurbished in dockyards and repurposed as a symbol of maritime achievement, the ship's legacy extended beyond mere survival, touching diplomacy and history. The British government restored the Resolute and, in a gesture of goodwill, later presented her to the United States, where she served for ceremonial purposes. The vessel became a symbol of resilience, international friendship, and naval craftsmanship, yet underlying the accolades remained the inexplicable drift through Arctic ice that had preserved her, when many might have expected only wreckage. Despite its Arctic ordeal, the vessel's rigging, deck fittings, and hull showed remarkable resilience, leaving engineers and sailors to speculate on the craftsmanship of its construction. Observers noted that the iron fastenings resisted corrosion, the hull timbers had survived months of ice pressure, and the sails, though stiff with frost, retained their structure. Such endurance highlighted not only the skill of the shipbuilders, but also the paradoxical nature of the Resolute's journey. Abandoned yet preserved, lost yet eventually found. Newspapers chronicled its return with awe, recounting tales of a ship adrift and abandoned yet preserved against all odds. Illustrations depicted the Resolute surrounded by ice floes, a solitary figure of human engineering in a landscape defined by peril. Articles speculated on the possible courses she had taken, noting the crew's careful evacuation and marvelling at the vessel's endurance. The story captured public imagination, blending verified facts with an aura of mystery that made the Resolute one of the era's most famous maritime enigmas. The story of the Resolute continues to captivate, a silent witness to Arctic peril, human determination, and the inexplicable twists of fate at sea. Generations of sailors, historians, and explorers have pondered her journey, each adding layers of intrigue while the ship herself remains long gone from the waters she once drifted through. The voyage of the HMS Resolute drifts through the frozen expanse, a quiet echo that the ocean itself seems reluctant to release. The Ghost Submarine U-Boat, 1945, Atlantic Ocean. A solitary U-boat surfaced unexpectedly, its conning tower cutting a sharp silhouette against the horizon, yet no sailor manned the deck. The morning sun glinted off the steel hull, highlighting the meticulously maintained vessel that had somehow come to rest in open water, bereft of human life. Observers on nearby merchant vessels reported the eerie silence of the craft, noting that flags, pennants, and navigation lights remained in their proper positions. The Atlantic waves lapped against the hull, a quiet accompaniment to the unnerving emptiness of a vessel built for warfare but found uninhabited. The vessel, a Type 9C submarine, measured over 250 feet in length and carried a complement of 50 men, torpedo tubes, and deck guns designed for long-range Atlantic missions. Built in the midst of the Second World War, the craft was engineered for durability, with a double hull, diesel-electric propulsion, and an operational depth exceeding 200 meters. Every compartment was functional, from the sonar room to the torpedo bays, yet the absence of any crew gave the impression that the submarine had simply been abandoned mid-mission, leaving its deadly potential untapped. Assigned to patrol the North Atlantic in 1945, the submarine had orders to intercept Allied convoys and report their movements, operating in a theatre fraught with danger. U-boat activity had intensified in the war's final months, with the Kriegsmarine dispatching submarines in increasingly perilous conditions as Allied air and naval patrols tightened their hold on supply routes. The Type 9 SC had been chosen for extended patrols due to its range and speed, capable of remaining at sea for months, yet the last operational reports indicated the crew had departed their normal course unexpectedly. When discovered, all hatches were sealed from the inside, and instruments indicated normal operation, leaving investigators baffled by the crew's absence. Controls were set to standard patrol settings, engine gauges displayed normal readings, and navigation instruments showed no signs of malfunction. The radio transmitter, usually active during missions, was silent, but the power systems were engaged, suggesting that the crew had left in a state of readiness or in a manner that eluded detection. The scene conveyed a chilling paradox: a fully operational war vessel, ready for combat yet entirely unmanned. Inside, torpedo chambers remained loaded, control panels were untouched, and radio equipment stood idle, suggesting no external attack had occurred. Personal effects, including boots, jackets, and navigation charts, lay precisely where they had been left, undisturbed. Officers' logs, when examined later, indicated routine patrol entries up until the final day, but offered no clue regarding the sudden disappearance. The meticulous order of the interior amplified the mystery, creating the impression that whatever had taken the crew did so quickly and silently. No records explained the fate of the crew, giving rise to theories ranging from sudden illness to mutiny, and even whispered accounts of supernatural intervention. Some speculated that a rapid outbreak of gas or contamination might have forced the crew to abandon ship, while others suggested covert enemy engagement could have compelled their departure. There were no corroborating reports of attack, however, and Allied reconnaissance found no evidence of conflict near the submarine's last known location. The combination of a sealed vessel and empty decks defied conventional logic, leaving historians and naval officers alike puzzled. Naval engineers examined the vessel meticulously, but all mechanical systems functioned, offering no evidence of failure or sabotage. The diesel engines were operational, the ballast tanks intact, and the rudder and propellers free of obstruction. Sonar tests indicated the hull remained structurally sound and emergency mechanisms had not been engaged. Even the life support systems retained air pressure and temperature control, suggesting that abandonment had not been a result of catastrophic technical failure. The meticulous functionality of every system deepened the enigma, prompting comparisons to ghost stories and maritime lore. Currents carried the submarine through the Atlantic, an unmanned predator of the deep, drifting silently as if guided by unseen hands. Despite its weight and design, it navigated through storm-tossed seas, avoiding collision with icebergs or other vessels. Mariners reported sightings spanning hundreds of miles, with each encounter describing the same haunting image: a combat-ready U-boat floating alone, its steel hull gleaming under the sun, as though time itself had paused aboard the vessel. Military logs preserved after the war mentioned the incident only briefly, recording a vessel found adrift but never linking it to casualties or enemy action. Photographs captured by naval observers show the submarine in stark isolation, with decks empty and conning tower doors tightly closed. Interviews with Allied sailors echoed the sense of unease, noting the precision of a ship designed for stealth yet abandoned in plain sight. The incident was catalogued and then largely forgotten in post-war analyses, leaving the submarine's final voyage to speculation and legend. Despite months at sea, the torpedoes, navigation charts, and life support systems remained intact, revealing both durability and the strangeness of their abandonment. Maintenance logs inside the vessel suggested all operational protocols had been followed, yet the absence of a crew remained the most striking anomaly. Every instrument, every gauge, and every chart seemed to testify to a voyage that had continued without human guidance, as if the submarine had developed its own path through the Atlantic. Journalists and naval historians recounted the incident with awe, emphasizing the paradox of a warship designed for stealth and destruction, yet floating uncrewed in open waters. Articles and reports highlighted the eerie precision of the vessel, the stillness of its decks, and the haunting impression it left on those who encountered it. The U-boat became a symbol of the mysteries of the ocean, demonstrating that even the most controlled and dangerous human inventions could be rendered enigmatic by circumstances beyond comprehension. The ghost submarine remains an enduring symbol of wartime enigma, a deadly machine left to the mercy of the Atlantic with no answers to its silent questions. Its story continues to inspire fascination among naval enthusiasts and historians, a reminder that the sea retains secrets that neither strategy nor engineering can fully explain. A lone submarine appears on the Atlantic horizon, its decks empty and intentions unknown, a silent shadow of war that sailors have whispered about for decades. The Palatine Light, 1752, Block Island, US. The Palatine set sail from the bustling port of Rotterdam in early 1752, carrying nearly 100 passengers seeking a new life in the American colonies. The passengers were primarily Palatine Germans, part of a larger wave of emigration fleeing religious persecution and economic hardship in Europe. For weeks, the vessel had braved the choppy waters of the North Atlantic, its wooden hull creaking against relentless swells, until it approached the jagged coastline of Block Island, an outpost notorious for its treacherous shoals and sudden storms. On the night the Palatine disappeared, eyewitnesses from the island's lighthouse reported a strange luminescence on the horizon. The glow, described in diaries preserved at the Rhode Island Historical Society, was unlike the flicker of a conventional ship lantern. It burned with an intensity that seemed impossible for a vessel adrift on open water. One observer, a young fisherman named Matthias Weber, later recounted that the light rose and fell as though inhaling, then stabilized into a steady burn that cut through the thick coastal fog. Historical records from New England describe the Palatine's intended route. The vessel was supposed to make landfall near New London, Connecticut, navigating through a narrow channel prone to hidden reefs, yet the Palatine was never sighted on its planned course. Searches by nearby fishing boats revealed no wreckage along the expected path, no life rafts, and no signs of struggle. Local historians later pieced together accounts from colonial officials, revealing that the Palatine vanished without leaving a trace beyond a handful of letters sent before departure and the occasional observation of its ill-fated glow near Block Island. Over the decades, sightings of the Palatine Light became a fixture of regional maritime lore. Mariners navigating the waters between Block Island and the Rhode Island coast consistently reported seeing a burning vessel hovering over the waves, its form often described as fully intact with sails unfurled, yet the hull untouched by water. One account from 1794, kept in the diaries of Captain Elias Bradford of the schooner Providence, details a night when the apparition followed his vessel for hours. Bradford recorded that the ship's glow did not fade, and though he attempted to approach, the mysterious vessel always maintained a steady distance. Appearing anchored in both space and time, residents maintained oral histories that intertwined with the official records. One recurring detail is that the Palatine Light seemed particularly attentive to travellers who had fled hardship or were attempting a new life, echoing the very purpose of the original passengers' emigration. Elderly storytellers in the 19th century recounted instances when families returning from Europe claimed to glimpse the phantom vessel during treacherous crossings, often describing a sense of unease, a feeling of being observed by something not entirely present. Scientific analysis conducted in the 20th century on these recurring sightings offered intriguing yet inconclusive results. Researchers from Brown University and the University of Rhode Island examined atmospheric conditions along Block Island's coast, particularly the way temperature inversions and fog could create optical illusions over water. While such phenomena could generate floating lights or magnified images of distant ships, they could not fully explain reports that described the hull's precise structure, masts, and lanterns. Furthermore, the intensity and duration of the observed glow in some accounts surpassed what would be expected from natural reflections or refracted light. In addition to eyewitness testimony, historical letters provide a window into the collective anxiety surrounding the Palatine Light. One letter, penned in 1772 by a Block Island resident named Abigail Tillinghast, describes a night when the glow appeared so close to the shore that she could make out the shapes of passengers waving from the deck. She wrote that the light lingered for what felt like hours before receding, leaving the island in silence. Such accounts, preserved in private family collections, reveal that the phenomenon was not confined to a single observer or generation, but rather spanned decades, embedding itself in the consciousness of anyone who relied on the sea for livelihood or survival. Shipwreck insurance records from the late 18th century also note claims related to the Palatine Light, with some policyholders citing unusual maritime events near Block Island that disrupted navigation and caused near collisions with invisible hazards. Maritime archaeologists in recent years have attempted to reconcile the legend with historical fact. Surveys of the seafloor around Block Island using sonar and submersible vehicles have yet to locate wreckage matching the Palatine's description. Historical maps, cross-referenced with modern bathymetric data, suggest that shifting sands and shoals may have concealed debris, yet the absence of any verified remains continues to perplex researchers. The enduring mystery is compounded by the consistency of the reported shape, size, and position of the light across centuries, suggesting that whatever the phenomenon is, it transcends ordinary explanations of navigation error or optical illusion. Cultural interpretations of the Palatine Light reflect the human need to make sense of unexplained loss. Folklorists note that the glow has inspired poetry, local commemorations, and even maritime superstitions, including instructions for sailors to avoid certain areas after dark. Historians have traced the story through colonial, revolutionary, and modern periods, observing that each generation contributes new layers of detail while maintaining the core enigma, a ship lost to the sea, yet appearing repeatedly to those who traverse its waters. The narrative serves as both a historical footnote and a lingering question about the nature of reality at the intersection of memory, observation, and the unforgiving ocean. The Palatine Light remains a haunting presence along Block Island's coast, an intersection of documented emigration, maritime peril, and persistent human fascination. It embodies both a real tragedy and the inexplicable persistence of perception, a symbol of those who vanished yet are never truly forgotten. Even as modern navigation technology and atmospheric research advance, the light continues to defy complete understanding, asserting itself in stories, diaries, and the occasional terrified report from a passing sailor. The glow appears without warning, as though the sea itself has decided that some journeys are never to be completed. The SS Valencia, 1906, Vancouver Island. The wind tore across the deck of the SS Valencia, hurling waves against her steel hull with relentless fury. On a storm-laden February night in 1906, the passenger steamer struggled to maintain course along the jagged coast of Vancouver Island. Snow and rain blurred the horizon, and the roar of surf crashing over hidden reefs made navigation treacherous. On board, crew and passengers clung to the hope that the vessel would survive the tempest, unaware that the treacherous waters and poor charts of the Strait of Juan de Fuca were about to claim one of the Pacific Northwest's deadliest maritime disasters. The last radio messages, barely audible over static, conveyed only fragments of alarm, warnings of broken compasses, shifting cargo, and waves breaking over the deck. Rescue boats struggled through the surf, finding only fragmented evidence of the vessel's final moments. Lifeboats were capsized or torn from their moorings, and debris, including personal belongings, crates and wooden furniture, washed ashore over the following days. The official passenger list recorded 108 individuals aboard, yet the precise number lost remains uncertain due to incomplete immigration records and stowaways occasionally documented on similar voyages. Survivors, though few, recounted terrifying scenes of chaos, people trapped below deck and crew members swept into the freezing waters. Witnesses reported that the storm seemed almost sentient, targeting the ship with a precision that no human hand could have anticipated. Ship manifests from the era reveal that the Valencia carried a mix of immigrants and travellers bound for California, including families fleeing economic hardship in Europe and miners seeking work in the goldfields. Built in 1882, the Valencia had been a sturdy passenger steamer, her boilers and hull designed for the Pacific, yet even she was no match for the reefs near Vancouver Island. Measuring 235 feet in length with a draft of 14 feet, she carried a combination of coal-fired engines and auxiliary sails, a design considered reliable for coastal voyages. The vessel had weathered previous storms, but the area near Cape Beale was infamous among mariners for hidden underwater ledges, sudden fog banks, and powerful tidal currents that could dash a ship against jagged rocks within minutes. Survey maps of the time noted the location of treacherous reefs, yet discrepancies in early 20th century navigation charts left even experienced captains vulnerable. Days after the tragedy, reports began to surface of a ship drifting near the same treacherous coast, her lights flickering like a warning to those who dared approach. Fishermen and coastal lighthouse keepers recorded sightings of a vessel matching the Valencia's description, moving silently through fog or appearing stationary over the waves, as though hovering just above the seabed. One log from a lighthouse at Estevan Point noted a glowing outline on the water, with what appeared to be figures on deck, their movements subtle yet deliberate. Newspapers in Victoria and Vancouver chronicled these accounts, emphasizing the unsettling nature of a vessel that had been officially lost yet seemed to continue navigating the same waters. On fog-laden nights, fishermen reported seeing the silhouette of a vessel frozen as if time itself had halted around it. Some reported that their compasses would behave erratically when the apparition was near, while radio transmissions occasionally experienced static or interference. Survivors from other vessels recalled a sense of weight pressing down over the sea as the Valencia's lights emerged, a quiet, unnatural calm amid a region otherwise known for unpredictable weather. Photographs taken in the early 20th century by amateur photographers along the coast show faint, misty shapes consistent with the Valencia, though the images are grainy and impossible to verify conclusively. The persistence of the sightings, often decades after the initial wreck, suggests a phenomenon that cannot be explained solely by optical illusion or atmospheric refraction. Coastlines were scoured and archives examined by maritime historians, yet every piece of data, from sightings to weather logs, only deepened the mystery surrounding the Valencia. Researchers from the Canadian Maritime Museum analysed tidal charts, wind patterns, and survivor testimony to reconstruct the disaster, concluding that the ship's path toward Vancouver Island was doomed by a combination of outdated navigation, storm surge, and shifting sandbars. Yet these same historians acknowledge that the post-accident sightings remain unresolved, pointing to consistent details reported by witnesses over a span of 50 years. A notable report from 1950 describes a vessel resembling the Valencia near Berkeley Sound, with lights positioned identically to the original ship's navigation lamps. Such recurring observations, across generations and weather conditions, challenge conventional explanations and hint at something beyond ordinary maritime phenomena. In towns along Vancouver Island, the story of the Valencia has seeped into local memory, becoming a cautionary tale whispered across generations of sailors. Folklorists studying coastal communities note that children were warned not to mock or imitate the ship's siren-like whistle, lest the ghost vessel appear to enforce its spectral presence. Maritime training manuals and regional guides occasionally reference the Valencia, not only as a historical tragedy, but also as a reminder of the unknown forces that govern the Pacific Northwest waters. The legend has influenced local art, literature, and even navigation behaviour, with some captains altering course at night to avoid areas where the ghostly ship has been reported. For those who approach her resting place, the sea whispers hints that dissolve before they can be grasped, leaving her mystery intact. The combination of human error, mechanical limitations, and nature's volatility is well documented, yet it does not account for the repeated, inexplicable appearances that haunt witnesses. The Valencia's story continues to challenge the boundary between historical fact and persistent mystery, reminding all who hear it that the ocean can preserve events in a way that defies time and memory. Modern sonar surveys have located wreckage consistent with the vessel in shallow bays off Vancouver Island, yet no investigation has fully reconciled the physical remains with the detailed sightings that continue to emerge along the coastline. Some nights, witnesses claim the Valencia glides past the cliffs as if she were never wrecked, her lights a silent echo of lives that vanished too soon. The Blythe Star, 1973, Tasmania. The Blythe Star emerged from the depths of Tasmania's southern waters, its steel frame eerily intact as though untouched by time. When discovered by a passing cargo vessel several days after it vanished from radar, the ship rested in shallow waters near the Tasman Peninsula, surprisingly upright and remarkably preserved. There were no signs of collision or fire, and the hull bore only minor abrasions from reefs that might have threatened lesser vessels. The quiet of the scene contrasted sharply with the stormy seas recorded on the night the ship disappeared, leaving authorities and seafarers alike baffled. Photographs taken of the wreck show its deck largely undisturbed, giving an unsettling impression that the crew had simply vanished, leaving the ship to drift in waiting. Documentation shows the vessel departed Melbourne with a manifest of timber and industrial equipment, manned by 12 experienced sailors familiar with the southern seas. Logs from the Australian Maritime Safety Authority record a routine voyage intended to reach Hobart within 3 days. Crew members were seasoned, with years of experience navigating the challenging waters of Bass Strait and the southern coast. Nothing in their records indicated mechanical failure, nor were there reports of unusually severe weather along the typical route. Yet the Blythe Star never arrived, and no distress signals beyond a brief, garbled radio call were received. Tasmania's southern coastline is a maze of hidden reefs, sudden squalls, and unpredictable currents, where even routine voyages can turn fatal in an instant. Historical charts indicate the area around Matsuka and Tasman Island is particularly hazardous, with jagged rocks lying just beneath the surface and tidal surges capable of overturning small vessels. Mariners of the era often relied on local knowledge, but even this could not guarantee safety, especially during the notorious winter months. Experts examining the Blythe Star's disappearance concluded that the combination of strong southerly winds, treacherous tides, and an unremarkable navigational error could have led to the ship's sudden grounding. In February 1973, archival weather logs indicate that a sudden cold front swept through the Tasman Sea on the night the Blythe Star vanished, bringing gusts exceeding 70 knots and waves over 8 meters high. Meteorologists later noted that the rapid temperature drop and turbulent currents could have disoriented the crew, making traditional navigation tools unreliable. Combined with poor visibility and strong tidal eddies near the Tasman Peninsula, these conditions help explain why the ship was never reported en route and why its final resting place seemed so inexplicably isolated. Locals reported glimpses of a lone ship drifting unnaturally near the shore during thick fog, sometimes appearing suspended above the waves before vanishing. Fishermen in small craft described observing a silhouette matching the Blythe Star's outline, motionless despite strong currents. Some claimed the ship seemed to hover in place, with no wake trailing behind, as though defying the ocean itself. Even commercial pilots flying coastal routes during early morning mist noted what appeared to be a stationary vessel in areas where the Blythe Star had not been reported. These recurring sightings contributed to a growing sense that the ship had not simply disappeared but had taken on a spectral presence along the Tasmanian coastline. Authorities employed underwater cameras and detailed sonar scans, uncovering aspects of the wreck that defied expectations for a vessel of its size and cargo. Investigators noted that the ship's hull remained mostly intact and free from structural collapse, unusual for a steel vessel subjected to sudden submersion. No evidence suggested the ship had broken apart on impact, and there were no traces of collision with other vessels or large rocks. The sonar scans also revealed that the ship was resting at an angle inconsistent with natural sediment shifts or tidal movement, implying that some other force had contributed to its final position. These findings prompted further study and speculation, ranging from underwater currents to unobserved phenomena influencing the wreck's preservation. Observers noted that the crates of timber and machinery remained perfectly arranged, while the ship rested at an angle inconsistent with tidal patterns and seabed contours. Cargo that would have shifted during a grounding or sinking was found in orderly stacks, as though the vessel had been placed gently into its resting spot. Some investigators proposed that a sudden underwater upwelling could have held the ship in place, while others suggested the ship may have briefly floated over a sandbar before settling unusually. Whatever the explanation, the condition of the Blythe Star remained a central puzzle, giving rise to questions about whether its disappearance had been purely accidental or influenced by factors unseen to the naked eye. Stories of the Blythe Star became embedded in Tasmanian coastal culture, inspiring warnings to sailors and whispered tales of a ship whose journey was never truly complete. Community members recounted family legends of ships appearing in unexpected bays, evoking unease and prompting caution during coastal navigation. Some coastal inns hung photographs of the wreck as reminders of the sea's mercurial power, while local historians wrote about the Blythe Star in newspapers and journals, blending fact with lingering mystery. In these retellings, the vessel became a symbol of the ocean's ability to preserve, conceal, and mystify, a ghostly testament to those lost at sea. Research and first-hand accounts continue to puzzle those who study the ship, with questions about its disappearance and condition refusing to be answered fully. Sonar mapping, weather analysis, and archival research provide fragments of understanding, yet each explanation seems to deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. Mariners approaching the same waters still speak of uneasy sensations, fleeting shadows, or strange, undisturbed silhouettes in shallow bays where the Blythe Star was found. The combination of well-documented disappearance, unusual wreck condition, and recurring local observations ensures the vessel's story endures, a maritime enigma that defies closure even decades later. The Blythe Star lingers in memory and mist, an enigma waiting quietly beneath the restless southern waters. The HMS Eurydice, 1878, Isle of Wight. Snow and sleet battered the decks of the HMS Eurydice, turning the night into a whiteout that swallowed sound and horizon alike. On the evening of March 24, 1878, the 26-gun frigate, serving as a cadet training vessel, sailed from Portsmouth toward the Isle of Wight, expecting a routine voyage. Within minutes, visibility dropped to near zero, and the temperature plummeted as a sudden winter blizzard swept across the Solent. The ship's seasoned officers attempted to maintain course, but the combination of wind gusts and turbulent tides created conditions that would overwhelm even experienced hands. Witnesses on nearby vessels later described the frantic struggle to keep the Eurydice upright before she vanished beneath the snow-laden waves, leaving only the roar of the storm behind. Launched in 1843, the Eurydice was a wooden-hulled frigate, originally designed for naval warfare and later adapted to train young cadets. Her conversion involved reducing armament and installing training spaces, allowing for up to 200 cadets to be aboard during exercises. Known for her speed and agility, the ship had weathered previous storms in the English Channel, but the modifications for training may have slightly altered her handling. Records from the Admiralty indicate that the officers and cadets aboard were highly experienced, many having undergone rigorous drills and prior voyages along these same waters. Despite this, the night's sudden blizzard proved far beyond their preparedness, testing the limits of the ship and crew alike. Ship logs preserved from the Eurydice's prior voyages indicate that the cadets had been extensively trained in emergency drills, including man overboard and capsize scenarios. Meteorological observations from nearby stations recorded a sudden blizzard sweeping through the channel, combining ferocious gusts and turbulent tides with lethal precision. Historical weather charts show that the storm intensified rapidly, producing gusts exceeding 80 knots and waves that rose unpredictably over the ship's decks. The shallow waters near the Isle of Wight, coupled with strong tidal currents, created localized turbulence that could overturn even a stable vessel. Navigators relied on visual cues and early chronometers, but in the chaos of whiteout conditions, instruments became nearly useless. This convergence of human, mechanical, and environmental limitations set the stage for one of the most tragic maritime disasters of the 19th century. Captains of vessels in the vicinity described seeing the Eurydice tilt sharply, her masts disappearing into snow-laden clouds before the ship vanished beneath the waves. One ferry captain recalled a momentary silhouette of the ship's hull before it seemed to evaporate into the blizzard. Other observers reported hearing faint distress signals carried erratically over the storm, though none could be interpreted clearly. Families along the coast later recounted seeing a strange glimmer of lights on the horizon, giving the impression that the ship lingered just out of reach before the waters claimed her entirely. These accounts, though varied, consistently emphasized the suddenness and severity of the storm, suggesting that no warning could have fully prepared the crew. Contemporary accounts from the coast describe the sound of heavy timbers striking the water, a fleeting signal of the Eurydice's rapid descent, which left virtually no trace for rescuers to follow. At the time, contemporary newspapers and letters recorded the widespread shock and grief following the loss, documenting both official inquiries and the personal tragedies of those aboard. The London Times reported that over 300 cadets and crew members were lost in the sudden sinking, marking it as one of the deadliest training vessel accidents in British naval history. Eyewitness accounts, letters from grieving families, and records from naval tribunals offer a sobering picture of the event, noting both heroism and helplessness. The rapid sinking left little evidence for investigators, complicating efforts to determine exactly how the ship capsized and why so few survived. Public memory of the Eurydice's loss became intertwined with a sense of mystery, as the storm's ferocity and the lack of survivors allowed speculation to flourish. Examination of the ship's cadet training modifications indicates that adjustments may have inadvertently compromised her stability under extreme storm conditions. Naval engineers later suggested that the reduction of ballast and structural changes for accommodating cadets slightly raised the vessel's center of gravity, making her more susceptible to capsizing and sudden gusts. Studies of the wreckage, combined with historical tidal and wind data, imply that the Eurydice could have rolled sharply, taking on water rapidly. No structural failure was evident in her hull, suggesting that human and environmental factors, rather than poor maintenance, were the primary causes of the disaster. These findings, while logical, fail to diminish the eerie abruptness with which the ship disappeared from view. A ghostly vessel appears in winter storms, eyewitnesses along the Isle of Wight say, a haunting reminder of the Eurydice's fate. Residents claim to see a spectral outline of a ship, white against the snow and fog, gliding unnaturally across the waves before vanishing. Coastal lore preserved the memory of cadets lost to the sea, often retold as warnings to those navigating the same waters. Artists and writers of the period depicted the Eurydice in paintings and prose, emphasizing her final moments amid the blizzard, capturing both the physical disaster and the lingering psychological impact on those who observed it. The story became a permanent fixture in the region's maritime consciousness, an intersection of fact, fear, and memory. Modern storm simulations and historical reconstructions offer insight into the sinking, yet the precise sequence of events remains elusive to this day. Computer models replicate the conditions, demonstrating how rapid shifts in wind and tide could have caused the Eurydice to capsize within moments. However, the exact positioning of cadets, officers, and the ship's cargo, combined with unpredictable microcurrents, leaves certain details unresolved. Scholars continue to debate whether minor adjustments could have prevented the disaster, or if the blizzard's sudden onset made the loss inevitable. The enduring uncertainty ensures that each retelling maintains an edge of suspense, bridging historical record with the haunting allure of maritime mystery. On stormy nights, some claim a fleeting white silhouette crosses the waves near the Solent, as if the Eurydice herself still searches for a harbour she never reached.